Tammy, but you swam in the
They've not
baker.
written a letter yet to specifically request this be.
You know there's what they call river people down there now on the Baker River?
Well, they have.
Yeah,
I
but
didn't
yeah.
know anything. Yeah.
Just look. Here's some photos that accompany the letter that from Patton, who was next at our table.
Yeah, I'm curious to look at it. I may have to recuse myself on this one. I'm gonna butter.
Let me put my hearing aid in so I can talk to you.
Just to let you know ahead of time, I think I probably will. I may end up speaking against it elsewhere, so I don't know. Sure.
So if you recuse yourself, you actually should move.
Yeah, I will move out there.
Terrific.
She's protecting him.
Well, at least for whoops. Huh? Stumbled. The guy hadn't had it on for more than 4 hours.
I can get by.
You can.
Yeah, I don't need much.
Can we get a little more light?
I know, it's just not working.
You should
See, this typically.
turn. Is that got a dimmer on it?
How about the other one?
Oh, there.
There it is.
Yeah. Okay.
That helps.
Yeah, and then this one usually
Not a
goes
chance.
to the-
All right.
Okay.
I was doing my braille anyway.
So Miriam, we need 4 for a quorum, is that correct?
Yeah. Let's see. No, 9. We need 5.
We need 5. Okay. We have 5.
5. We got 5. Yeah.
Yeah, I may not be able to sit on it.
I'm sorry.
For as an abutter, I may have
Oh,
to
yeah,
recuse
that's
myself
right.
on this one.
Oh.
Well, we're not going to take any action.
Well, we're not going to take action.
And Mike- and here
okay, now
comes
we got
Mike.
Mike, so we're good.
I'm on Parker Street, but I have a
But we need,
corner
we
of
need
Allen
5 for
Avenue and
subdivision, but
Fairgrounds.
it's.
I have a rental, a to-be rental.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's,
They separated us, Mike.
And I put too many Johns together. I put all the Johns together.
all right, according to the clock on the wall, it is 6:30. I think the clock's a little bit slow, but so if we're a little bit late, I hope that everybody will indulge us. It's 6:30. I'm John Krugerberg, the chair of the Plymouth Planning Board, and I'll call the meeting to order now. First, up on our list, or on our agenda, we have the roll call of members. Present are John Ranlett, representing the Select Boards, Selectman John Kelly, Bert Sutcliffe, the Town Planner, Paul Wilson, and Mike Ahern. So that gives us a quorum, and we can move ahead with our business. The next item on our agenda are public comments. At this time, I welcome any comments from the public on any item that's not on tonight's agenda. Seeing no public comment at this time, we'll move on to administrative matters. We have some minutes to consider, beginning with the minutes of November 19th. These were mailed to us in our packets. You want to pull them out and see if anything comes to your eye that needs to be addressed.
looking at November 19th now?
Yeah, November
Yes, November 19th. Do you have a question about that? Whenever anybody feels like making a motion to accept these, that can be done.
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we accept the minutes as drafted.
Is there a second?
I second it.
That was moved by Mr. Randlett and seconded by Mr. Wilson. Is there any further discussion on that? All in favor of adopting the November 19th, 2009 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And that passes. Moving on then to December 3rd minutes. If anybody sees anything on the first page or anything on the second page? The third page? The fourth page.
Make a motion to accept the minutes.
Is there a second for Mr. Ahern's motion? Yes, by Mr. Wilson. Is there any further discussion of this? All in favor of accepting the, approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? So that passes as well. Next on the agenda is correspondence. We have one piece of correspondence that was given to us on the table, which I think we'll address as part of the public comments for the new business on the subdivision site plan review. Is there any other correspondence that the town planner has?
Yeah, we were informed by John,
Radigan?
I'm sorry.
Radigan?
Radigan, that's right. John Radigan, the town attorney, that there has been a date set for oral argument for the Lowe's case, and that's Batchelder versus the town of Plymouth, and that's for January 20th at 9:30 a.m. at the New Hampshire Supreme Court, and that's the date for the oral argument.
Thank you. And then we're on to new business, and there are two items under new business. The second is going to be the proposed zoning ordinance text and map amendments, but first up is a preliminary subdivision and site plan review. Would the town planner like to sort of reintroduce us to this?
Yeah, this is the design phase of subdivision and site plan review, so it's not required, but the applicant has decided to give us this extra chance to review the plans before he goes for the preliminary and then final. Just to give a history on this, the applicant, Jeff Brown, has requested conceptual subdivision and site plan review from the Planning Board on October 15th, 2009. We had some excerpted minutes. I attached that to your report. The proposal is to combine 12 lots into 2 lots. It was originally presented as 3 lots, but now it's going to be reduced to 2. One of the proposed 2 lots will be 4.92 acres, and the other lot's proposed to be 1.841 acres. A multifamily complex of 4 buildings, each with 6 units, for a total of 24 dwelling units, is proposed to be placed on the 4.92 acre lot. The 1.84 acre lots proposed for a single-family residence. The original 12 lots were subdivided by the Blackie family as part of Mountain View Farm Development in 2005. At the October 15th, 2009 Planning Board meeting, the Planning Board wanted the following concerns addressed the next time the applicant came before them. The first one was wetlands determination. The applicant has done this. No wetlands were found on this site. That's the 4.92 acre site and also the other lot, the 1.84. 2, impact on the abutters from increasing the road width. That's been taken care of. The town engineer and myself, we went and measured the existing road, and it's just short of the required width. The required width is 24 feet wide, and we measured it at 23.5 feet, so 23.5 feet, so it's 6 inches short. You can put 3 inches on each side. It won't be noticeable. There's one sort of driveway curb, and it's not going to really extend farther than that. We'll just be at the most 6 inches on a side, but probably split it evenly and be 3 and 3. Number 3, impact this proposal would have on the town's sewer capacity. This has been done. I talked with Kevin Lincoln, who's the district administrator for Plymouth Village Water and Sewer, and he assured me that the project will not have a negative impact on municipal sewer or water. They do have to provide a connection, but it's available and the capacity is adequate to serve the project, and I know the applicant knows to contact him. I think they've already been in communication because Kevin Lincoln was very familiar with the project. For review of the Blackie, it's also sometimes called BICO project. It's sometimes called Mountain View Farm cluster subdivision, to ensure that this new proposal will follow the conditions of the original cluster subdivision. I went back through the records. I've got a big file here. If anyone wants to look at the Blackie subdivision, they're welcome to. I looked at the notice of decisions. I went through all the approvals. Basically, it was a common open space plan, and they were designated open space areas, and this project will not impact the designated open space areas. So where they're proposing to put this is where they were going to put large single-family homes, single-family lots, but it doesn't impose any of the open space. And one of the conditions also was that they put a 50-foot open space perimeter buffer was required around the whole development, and this development is also going to maintain the 50-foot buffer. Finally, one of the conditions was a minimum of 20 feet is required between buildings, and the new proposal shows the building's going to separate it anywhere from 55 feet apart to 90 feet apart, so they comply with the 20-foot building separation that was required in the original. 5, a request that a topographic map be presented at the next submittal, and this has been done. It was included in your mail out, small scale. I have the large scale up here on the table. This proposal also went before the Zoning Board of Adjustment on December 1st, 2009 to request 2 special exceptions. One was to allow multifamily use in the agricultural zone. Multifamily is allowed in the agricultural zone, but as a special exception, so it needs to meet a certain set of criteria. And one to allow multiple buildings on one lot. The request is 4 buildings on one lot. The Zoning Board of Adjustment members, they tabled this request pending the applicant going before the Planning Board for the site plan review, because the ZBA had concerns about the stormwater drainage, and they wanted that addressed as part of site plan review prior to reviewing the special exception request. Since it was felt that the way the site concerns were addressed could affect how the development will impact the surrounding properties. The current submittal, this is the design phase review, so it's not so it has less requirements than if they did the preliminary or the final. And they have provided us with everything that they're required. A site location map, they provided us with that. The site assessment, they provided us with that. An indication of any current or future subdivision contemplated in or adjacent to the site, that's been provided. The topographic map's been provided. Soil map has been provided. So staff has determined the application's complete. The town planner sent this request to the technical review committee, which is water and sewer, police, fire, engineer, building inspector, highway manager, and school superintendent. And then what I do is I send out what the proposal is by email and tell them that we're going to have a meeting, and they can either come to my office at their leisure, or we have one meeting date and time that they can come, and then we can all discuss it together. So we had our meeting, and at that meeting was Casino Clarkson, who's the fire chief, Kevin Lincoln from Plymouth Village Water and Sewer, Brian Murphy, who's the building inspector, code compliance enforcement officer, and then myself, the town planner. And we discussed this on December 3rd. Plymouth Village Water and Sewer said that it might make more sense to connect with the water and sewer line going through that unnamed stub out. That's the one that's over, not Allen Street. Okay, so whatever that other, doesn't have a name, it's just stub out. The fire chief said that the pond might be used as a secondary water source for fire suppression, but it's not critical to have it because a water hydrant will be required to be installed by the applicant to serve this development. And also he noted that the applicant's going to be putting sprinklers into each of the buildings. So that lessens the need to use the pond, but at least he has it as a secondary source. Finally, he noted this development will likely increase the number of fire and rescue calls, but not to such an extent to impose impact fees. The development meets the zoning ordinance development standards, except staff could not make a definitive determination on the maximum lot coverage requirement until the applicant provides staff with a figure for the proposed ISR. That number is not required at this stage of the review, but just letting you know, in the future we'll need the ISR calculation. In addition, although the parking shown in the site plan meets the minimum zoning ordinance requirement, which is 1.5, okay, it shouldn't say spacer, it should say spaces, it's a typo. 1.5 spaces per dwelling per the first bedroom, and then 0.5 spaces per each additional bedroom. And if it turns out that something turns out to be like 2.5 spaces, we round up to 3. Staff's recommending the applicant consider providing guest parking spaces to lessen impact this development might have on surrounding properties. And I did talk to Jeff Brown about that, and he said they were talking about providing visitor spaces. It's not a requirement in our ordinance, but it just from viewing how developments have been done in the past, it seems like it's something that's needed, that the people that live there have wanted that. Staff recommends the planning board make the following motion. One, motion to accept the application as complete for design phase review. The design review phase does not require the application be approved, but merely provides the planning board an opportunity to provide feedback to the applicant. This request will come back before the planning board for preliminary final subdivision review and for site plan review, the final site plan review. Staff comments, just what I've mentioned before, it's just sort of a summary. 1, staff recommends the applicant consider providing guest parking spaces. 2, the next submittal should include a drainage study and drainage mitigation plan. It's not required at this level, but we need it for the next one. 3, the next submittal should include a proposed lot coverage figure. And 4, staff's recommending town engineer review of this project. So an engineering plans review escrow needs to be established prior to town engineer review, and that has been established. So the applicant has agreed to let the town engineer review this, and since there's a number of concerns about stormwater drainage, that's why we're asking that receive the town engineer review, and as I said, the applicant has already established the escrow.
Okay, thank you very much. So just to be clear, we're not going to make any decisions tonight. This is an opportunity for the applicants to get more feedback from us, and we're going to also use this opportunity to hear what members of the community feel about this and any issues and light they may shine on this and through a public hearing. It does appear, in terms of procedure, that we need a motion from the.
Before anybody makes the motion, could I recuse myself on this one
You certainly may.
matter before the board as an abutter?
Are there any other abutters or reason to recuse? It looks like that we need a motion to accept the application as complete, but only complete for a design phase review. It will have to be determined to be complete as a site plan review at a later meeting when they come up to that stage.
I make a motion that its application is complete for design review.
Thank you, Mr. Ahern.
Second.
And seconded by Mr. Randlett. Everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that passes unanimously. All right. Why don't we invite the applicant up to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Thank you very much. Just to reintroduce myself, I'm Jeff Brown, and I'm working with Dick Hanaway on this project. And I don't really have a whole lot more to add. The summary really was very thorough. And Jeff Lewis here is from North Point Engineering and is going to answer pretty much all your technical questions. And we're hoping to move this process along. Pardon my voice, I can't talk very well, but I'll leave it in Jeff's capable hands. I'd also like to introduce Ignatius McClellan, who is with the Northern New England Housing Investment Fund. They are our consultants in putting together the financing and the proposal, which is receiving financing from New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority's low-income housing tax credits, as well as USDA rural development, a combination of funding from those sources. And Ignatius can answer any questions about that process. So I'll leave it with Jeff, and I'm here to help answer any questions that I can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Once again, Jeff Lewis from North Point Engineering. Just a couple of things. I'm going to assume that everyone's somewhat familiar with the project. I know we were back before the board in October, and with just conceptually, but the project is pretty much the same as what we presented at that time. We are about, I would say, we're about 80–85% through the final design stage of this. We wanted to take a real good look at the drainage design and the utilities and how this thing was going to have an impact relative to topography out there. Take a look at Allen Ave, which is where we're proposing to make the connection to. So we have a pretty good set of design development drawings. Before we finish those up, we wanted to take the opportunity to come in here, make a presentation, get any other input from the community and from the neighbors out there. We're well aware that drainage is one of the big things, at least from my perspective as the engineer, that we need to look at out there. I hadn't seen this site until just a couple months ago, so I've walked it several times. It is a unique situation out there with a pond, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about it, which will be somewhat enlightening for myself as well. But there is a feature out there of this pond that apparently is a man-made pond. What I've heard is it was constructed or done by DOT back as part of the 93 project back in the day, decades ago. And it's, as a remnant now, there's a hole in the ground that fills up with water when the runoff comes down the hillside. There's about 60 acres, based on my calculations, of hillside that flow into this pond that has no outlet. And then when it does fill up and there's no outlet, the water just goes right through it and flows right down what's Page Street. Right now, at least that's what I've been told, and from my inspections out there this fall, it certainly appears that that's the only outlet when that pond fills up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to try to knock into a whole lot of other detail other than the things I think are of interest tonight. Obviously, we have just very quickly, I think everybody's aware that we have what I have outlined in here. It's hard for me to do because I know everybody can't really see this drawing, but what I have outlined in here, this is the subdivision plan, which is the first aspect of this. We really will have two applications that are coming before the board. A subdivision application which proposes to consolidate a number of the single-family lots that have been previously subdivided, approved for subdivision, but obviously haven't been built. So consolidate those lots and then re-subdivide into these two lots we see here. The larger one obviously being the focus of our project, for which we're proposing the 24-unit apartments. And then the last piece is this remnant piece that will be back in here adjacent to the pond that will be accessed off of Crescent Street. And the intent is that this parcel will remain a part of the cluster subdivision, the Mountain View subdivision. So it is subject to all the requirements of the cluster subdivision, and it'll have the buffer, and it'll have access off of Crescent Street. This parcel here would then be removed from that cluster subdivision. It would be a standalone parcel, which we then access off of Allen Ave, or Fairgrounds Road. So what we've tried to do, or what we would like to do, is in looking at then this parcel that we're proposing to develop, which is just under 5 acres, is to keep the proposed buildings pulled back from the property line, so that there's a 50-foot, for maintaining a 50-foot building setback. I believe in the zone, we're only required by ordinance to have a 20 or 20 foot, I think a 20 foot, I'm not sure exactly, but it's certainly a lot less than the 50 foot.
Yeah, 30 for your front and 15 for your side and
15
rear.
for the side. So really, we'd be only required to have a 15-foot setback here, but we want to maintain that 50-foot distance because it is what's consistent with the cluster subdivision, and to provide just further buffer, knowing that especially on the east side of our subdivision or of our lot, we have existing homes on Page Street and Allen Ave. So that's one thing we try to do, is take that 15-foot setback that we're required to have and push it right up to 50 feet. So that'd be the building setback. You can see from this layout, in addition to that, we tried to put all the buildings on the opposite side, on the west side of the lot, to the best extent possible. Because on this side, we do have undeveloped, for the most part, on this western side of our site is undeveloped land. So the major impact to existing neighbors out there will be on Allen Ave and Page Street. And additionally, what we try to do within that 50-foot setback is keep a 20-foot non-disturbed area. So we keep a 20-foot natural wooded buffer in there. And we'll certainly look at some other options for supplemental screening if it remains a concern. But that's how we generally came to this layout here. We are proposing an extension of Allen Ave, which is right now is a private street. It's part of the subject property. There are, and if there's questions about that, I'm sure we can get into that later. But it is a private street that's part of the subject property. So the intent is to extend Allen Ave far enough that there is access to the subject property, maintain it as a private street. So obviously the residents of Allen Ave will still benefit, as they do today, from the access onto Allen Ave. The only difference really will be that the property now will be responsible for maintaining that. So that burden will be removed from the homeowners on Allen. Additionally, we are proposing to extend the utilities as water and sewer that come to the end of the dead end of Allen Ave right here. Right now, we're proposing to bring them in, extend them the rest of the way in Allen Ave, and then bring them into the development. One of the comments that Miriam had from the design
Kevin
meeting
Lincoln,
was that possibly we could bring those utilities in through this area here directly from Fairgrounds Road. My thought is that in doing that, we're impacting an area that we otherwise wouldn't need to impact and tearing down some trees that we don't need to. Whereas if we brought it in through Allen Ave, it's a road that we're already building, so it would make sense to do that. I think the only thing we really need to do is make sure that the water line that's in Allen Ave is large enough to serve this building. I know the capacity of the main and Fairgrounds Road is all right. So we're still working on some of those details. It's possible when we come back to the board, we shift the utility design around a little bit, but we're kind of holding in on that. Before I talk about drainage, parking was the only other one thing I wanted to mention. What we do have is our calculation indicates that we're required to have 45 parking spaces for these units. There's 24 units. There's a variety of one-bedroom units, two-bedroom units, and a handful of three-bedroom units in there. So our calculation shows that there'd be 45 parking spaces. We're showing on the plan 48 parking spaces, which is 2 per unit. In reality, what we find, and Dick Hanaway can attest to this if there's any questions, is that really there's going to be somewhere that we're anticipating to be somewhere around one vehicle per unit for this type of development. So in our mind, we do have adequate parking spaces out there for guests in that we are providing two spaces per unit. If it's a concern of the board or of the community, what we probably prefer to do is reserve an area. We obviously have plenty of green area on here. Reserve an area for additional parking if it became necessary or a concern, after the project was developed. They could go back in and add some parking spaces. But at this time, we think it won't be necessary. We think to just add supplemental pavement that isn't necessary. So that's where we stand on that right now, but that's something we can talk about. Drainage. I'm going to do my attempt at walking through what I think is going on out there. And I'm going to start with this exhibit right here, which is probably hard to see, but this is a blow-up of a snap. And we have the site, our site, which is this little dark area right down in here. And then we have the big hillside behind it where here's Crescent Street Loop is right in here. And this is what I've identified, this pink area as the watershed area that comes down and drains down into the pond. From what I can tell, walking out there, the water that runs off this hillside historically, prior to any development that was out there, and prior to the pond being there, just ran off and was concentrated somehow once it got to the bottom of the slope, and then just continued to flow off to the west over here, and somehow ended up getting down to the river. I'm not sure at what point it crosses under Fairgrounds Road, but it goes off to the west. There's evidence of that on the parcel itself when we look at the topography, and that there's a shallow gully. I'm sure some of the neighbors know what I'm talking about. It goes right, kind of bisects the property. Where that gully kind of comes through Page Street, it's not really there anymore because Page Street's been built on top of it and the houses are there. But there is a drainage way, a historic drainage way that does run through here that drains this whole hillside. And there's a remnant of it that passes through our site. This plan right here shows the existing conditions that are out there. This is the topography that we have. We have surveyed topography on our site. We have some aerial topography off the site that goes up the hillside. And here's the pond right here. This is about the limits of the pond if it were to be full. And this is Page Street right here, Crescent Street, Allen Ave, and here's the site right here. From what I can tell, what happens is this pond fills up. And when it fills up and then it receives more water, it overflows right here, right about at the end of Page Street, and water comes rushing down Page Street, and then I think it flows down the east side of the road, and at some point jumps over the road, across into the road, and flows right in through these two properties here, right there, yeah, right by the end of Allen Ave, through the backyard of this property, and then right into this section of the subject lot, which is this little shallow gully, and then exits to the west and continues on its way. So this property that we're developing is downstream from anything that's going on over here. That's, I guess, is the first thing that I'd know. The Mountain View Farm subdivision plans, which were approved a number of years ago, and were approved by the state, and had a wetlands permit and multi-acre terrain permit and town planning board approval, had proposed a solution or some type of mitigation for this issue of the water flowing down Page Street. And that was, at the time, there was going to be a cul-de-sac road that came in right through here, and they're proposing to build a catch basin, a little structure right here that would collect the overflow runoff from the pond and pipe it down Page Street and then dump it out right about here and just send it on its merry way right through the where it currently flows. What we are proposing to do, at least at this time, is I'm going to bring up my other plan right here. This is a plan that shows the same thing as that plan did, but it shows our development right here with our proposed grading in there. Again, here's Page Street. Here's where that flow currently comes down. That's through those properties. What we propose to do is construct a swale right back here within this property and within it cuts through the second lot up here that would provide a constructed overflow for the pond at a lower elevation than the end of Page Street right here. So as this pond is still going to fill up as it does today, the only thing we're doing is providing an outfall that will go right through here and just kind of bypass Page Street and everything down there, and then come into the subject property and go on its same path that it currently does, and leave our property where it does today. That's, in simple terms, the way that we feel like we can best address this as a property that is affected by it, and hopefully solve the problem, the drainage problem, for all the folks on Page Street who experience that flooding annually or every other year. I'm not sure. I mean, whenever that pond fills up and then it rains, it's got to overflow. I have no idea how often that happens. But our feeling is that would be a way that we could control or know where that water is going to go without, it wouldn't affect any properties. We have a couple of culverts here. There'll be a culvert under the end of our turnaround on Allen Ave, and then there'll be a culvert under our drive on our site that this water would flow through before it leaves the site where it does today. So that's kind of my short description, if you will, of what we're proposing. I have a full set of the grading plans that have the detailed grading for our site. Obviously, our site runoff, our site drainage is separate. We're treating this as if it was an off-site flow. It comes through our site, and we just let it go. We're obviously adding pavement and impervious surfaces to the site, so we'll have our on-site drainage system and detention basin. We have very good soils out there that we expect to be able to use to percolate some of the collected runoff. So in addition to allowing this flow to pass through our site, we'll also be doing our on-site drainage analysis to ensure that we're not increasing that flow when it does leave the site, so that we're not affecting the downstream people. But this is really based on, my understanding and my, I guess, thoughts on what's happening out there with the drainage right now. Clearly it's an issue. If this pond were not here, if it were filled in for some reason, every time it rained, that water would come off that hillside and would go right down Page Street. So what this really does is it provides some type of buffer so that it's collecting water, and the water is only flowing down Page Street when this thing happens to be full. But it is a natural drainage course through this whole area. So what we're trying to do is just bypass the areas that there already is lot development and design the rest of the site around that, knowing that it's there. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyways, that's my I guess 10-minute spiel. I'm going to those were the major things I wanted to talk about. Like I said before, we're pretty well into the final design here. We wanted to have this opportunity to hear other thoughts or other opinions and make sure that we do have all the facts before we wrap up and come back to you hopefully next month. So I'll stop there and answer any questions.
Thank you. At this time, does anybody on the board have any questions? Mr. Ranlett?
Yes, you said there was a detention pond?
Right, on our site?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a grading plan for the site. I believe it's the third or fourth sheet in here. And obviously this is preliminary right now. Let's see. Sheet 3. This is the grading plan that we have. We have a series of catch basins and area drains within the development that will collect all the runoff and bring it down to right down this area right here is what we're proposing to have a detention basin. It's the lower end of the site. We'll have the basin down there and provide some treatment down there for the on-site stormwater runoff, and then we'll let it go back into the drainage swale that runs through the property right here. So we don't have the detail of that design worked out. We don't have it sized, the final size of it done yet, but that's right about where we are. That's probably what I'll be working on tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kelly?
I have a couple of questions. How many on the lot that you are going to put those 4 houses and 72 residents, how many single-family homes were designed to be on that lot?
How many single-family homes are being consolidated?
No, I said how many homes were
Right.
originally planned for that lot?
I think 12.
Consolidating 12 into 2. 12 lots
right
into 2.
Yeah.
I think. It's this plan right here. So there's,
Yeah, okay, so instead of, say, well, I was figuring on 2 to a family, that's 24 people, or even 36 people that would be on those 4 houses. And here we have 72 people on that. Am I
Why
correct?
72? I mean, it's 24 units.
24 times 3. I'm using it equally. 3 people to a family for 12 lots is 36 people. 24 times 3 is 72, right? So you're doubling the number of people that are going to be on there. I've been on the board for some time along with John Kuchenberg, the chairman, and when they were talking about Lowe's on Tenny Mountain Highway, the water department indicated they were at or near the 80% capacity, and that they were afraid that they were going to have to either redesign the water and sewer department or the treatment center, and at that time they figured about 20 people were going to be maybe using the toilet facilities in Lowe's. So now they're saying it's not going to adversely affect them, and you get 72 people. And another thing is that the police department up just a little ways further on Main Street, or whatever you want to call it, say they have a very low pressure in their police department. And I just don't seem to get the connection between where it was 3 years ago, they were at 80% capacity, and they were worried about if Lowe's goes in, they were going to go over the capacity. And maybe Mr. Hool could address that because he was on the committee at that time. So the other thing too is who's going to pay for the sewer and water going into this project? Is it going to be the town, or is it going to be you folks? Okay. All right. And there was a lot of questions when they put that mobile home up there. You know, the mobile home pack?
The Hall subdivision?
Hall pack. There was a lot of problems with that, and that's right next to this lot. I'd like to have somebody review that to see what all the problems were, so that we don't find that this thing is developed and then we have all those various problems. And I think probably it might be a good idea. I don't know whether that's a town road or a state road, or is it town road?
Which one?
The Fairgrounds Road, town road?
State.
State, okay.
State.
But I was wondering if somebody could possibly look to see if there could be an improvement of the water drainage going across Fairgrounds Road, because there seems to be some question as to where that water goes when it hits the Fairgrounds Road between that and the river. So if somebody could look at that, I would appreciate it. I think that's all the questions I have now, or comments, or whatever you want to call it.
Thank you. Anybody else from the board? Well, at that time, in that case, I'd like to give the public an opportunity to raise any concerns, to speak to this proposal in any way that they see fit. So I'm officially opening this public meeting at 7:11. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak to this proposal?
Ernie Philbrick, I live on Allen Avenue. My neighbor Steve Blanchard. We consulted with attorney Pete Carey at Gabe Nidzik's office. As I stated in the Board of Adjustment meeting, this homeowner has been responsible for that road for 36 years. And we are claiming ownership of Allen Avenue under the adverse possession law. We have that right. We don't want them using that road. If Mr. Blackie wants to dispute that, that's his right too. It's going to have to be taken up in court. And typically, these cases take 1.5 to 2 years to resolve. Depends on how vigorously everybody wants to pursue it. As of right now, we're not going to let them use that road because we've been taking care of that road for 36 years. We have that right. As for the drainage, they're never going to resolve that drainage problem. It just what he proposed with the swale is going to come right down to my backyard. It's going to dump more water. It may divert it from Page Street. It's going to dump it right in my backyard. It's going down through that gully, through Mr. Hall's property, and over to Chris Wood's property across Fairgrounds Road, which they got flooded out a couple of years ago, big time. And when that water from the impervious surface area hits Fairgrounds Road, I don't know how big that pipe is, I'm not sure how big it is, but that volume of water hits that pipe. It may just flow over Fairgrounds Road. It may wash out the underlying roadbed. Nobody knows. So all those issues got to be addressed. As for Allen Avenue, we own it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Just a
Thank you.
clarification.
Yes.
Could we ask the speaker just to give us the name of the attorney in the office again so I can write it down?
Mr. Philbrick, could you provide the name?
Attorney Pete Carey from Gabriel Nidzik's office.
Zedek.
Forget how to pronounce it. Thank you.
Actually, seeing that there is a large audience, could I just get a show of hands of how many people do plan to speak tonight? Okay. Thank you very much. I saw Mr. Hool and then somebody 2 rows behind him had their hands up right after Mr. Philbrick did. Mr. Hool, would you like to speak?
I just briefly would like to address the drainage issue that has taken a good deal of time in the discussion of the proposal that we have before us. When the Blackie project was approved, when we were sitting on this board, excuse me, drainage was an issue for that subdivision. And Paul Fluitt, who was the engineer for the applicant at the time, did look at the watershed area as it affected the pond and the overflow from the pond as it migrated down towards the Baker. And in terms of that subdivision and disturbances and improvements that were associated with that subdivision, which included the single-family residential subdivision down in the lower flat area of the development, and the proposal for the later phases to do condominium development on the upslope region of that Blackie property. The net result of all of those improvements taken together did not show significant enough increase in the watershed outflow into the pond that it would measurably alter the outflow from the pond down Allen or Page and migrating down towards the David Hall subdivision where it crosses, and then west of that or south of that crosses Fairgrounds Road. So in terms of what's been looked at previously to what you're looking at today, this development virtually has no impact on that pond issue or the watershed area itself. And what they're proposing and what I've heard, if that is followed through with, I think will only serve to remediate what issues have plagued those neighborhoods up till this point in time. The Blackie development was itself going to make some improvements, as was alluded to by this gentleman, when they got to developing that part of their project. But this is sort of preempting that, and will do it sooner as opposed to later.
Thank you. I know Mr. Hool from his years on the board, but I didn't know the name of the person who was about 2 rows behind him. I'm not seeing any...
My name is Joel Hartz. I was born in Plymouth. I'm not currently a resident, but I do have an interest in the activity as it is currently presented to the board. There are a number of questions that concern me. Primarily, I went to the town and tried to get a copy of Fluid Engineering's plans. Those plans are not available. There's a review that was done by another individual, but the actual plans themselves are not available. I was wondering if they would be made available to the townspeople to review so we can understand clearly what was originally proposed, so we can have a definitive understanding of what the impact will be. I appreciate the gentleman's opinion regarding this new parcel that's being developed. However, on a practical basis, if you walk down there after any typical wet weather, the area is substantially wet, and we have vernal pool. I think might be an exaggeration of what the water actually is, but there is standing water, and it is to describe it as percolating well would be an overstatement. I think Mr. Philbrick will note he tried to build a birdhouse, and after digging a foot down, he struck water. Bat house, excuse me. So I think the engineering plan would be nice for the townspeople to be able to review on a timely basis and understand it. I have yet to hear a definitive answer on how many actual housing lots were destined to be placed on that 4.92 acres specifically. I thought there were 7 homes on that 4.92 acres, which 24 units is a substantial deviation from that. And my understanding was the town of Plymouth made some pretty substantial zoning changes a few years back to protect the density from going forth at the same rate it had in the past. There's no doubt that particular area has a fairly dense population, but you can also look at the people who live there now are all been working together to better the area. They've been working with the zoning as it exists to have 1 and 2 acre lots, such that people who are bringing in their modular homes and stick-built homes aren't going to be negatively impacted by an increase in density. So I think that is another concern to consider. I guess in concluding, my last concern is this has been presented as workforce housing. Time and again, there's been some discussion exactly what workforce housing by definition means and what in practicality it means. And through some conversations with people who are familiar with the Bridge House, which is a wonderful organization that helps the community, as well as the housing that exists under Hanway management, that the majority of the people are not townspeople from the town of Plymouth. They come from a community that extends to a point throughout the state of New Hampshire. There are anecdotal evidence, people coming in from Concord because the housing was made available for them here. So it's a transplant versus actually helping the city of Plymouth or the town of Plymouth handle the problems that the town itself has. Those are my 3 concerns that raised, kind of my 4th thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name is Thomas Labor, and I happen to reside at the Bridge House right now. I was up here 7 years, and then I had to go to Florida to take care of my mother for 2 years. And I'm coming back to the area. In regards to what workforce housing is by definition, the New Hampshire Workforce Housing Council defines it as a broad range of owner and renter housing meeting the needs of families and individuals that represent the majority of New Hampshire's diverse workforce and whose income is generally below 120% of the area median. It is permanent housing intended as a primary year-round residence that is available to households regardless of age. They go on to say workforce housing can include, but is not limited to, subsidized and affordable housing. It is best provided near places of employment. I think the lot shows that it's around areas of employment that these people that would be working at. In regards to them being people who come from other areas, we need to also remember that as our bridge house fills up, there is now people who are from Plymouth in our community who have to go outside to Concord and down to Manchester and up to Littleton and all over the state. So yes, there are people at the bridge house who are from Concord, Manchester, wherever in the state. However, we also have those other people down there that belong to our area. What we would be doing here is we would actually be able to take people who are actually from our area and put them into permanent housing. I know of people who are at the bridge house, who are working. They serve in areas of common interest to all of us. They work at Burger King's. They work at our senior center. They're from this area. They are stuck at the bridge house right at this moment because there is no workforce housing available to them. Those are beds that are at the shelter that would be available tonight. I work the front desk as a volunteer. I can tell you there have been calls all this week that we have had to turn away people that those beds could be used for if we had workforce housing. The time is now. The funding is available now. It would only be in our interest to build this. So yes, that is the definition, and that is the practicality of the definition. So I stand in support of the workforce housing on this lot, and we look forward to working with you in regards to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Kathy Dunwood, I direct the Bridge House. I'm a resident of Plymouth. You're right, the Bridge House has taken people from all over the state, 41 towns this past year. But the majority of people come from Thornton, Laconia, Plymouth, and Camden. Looks pretty local to me. 2/3 of the people at Bridge House have full-time employment. I don't know what workforce is. I know they're working, and they're working full-time, but what they're earning they could never avail themselves of any type of permanent housing unless something decent like this is provided. And these are the people who wait on us at Walmart and Sodexo and Rite Aid and are laying, tile and wood in our homes and cleaning the motels. And they don't have health care, and they sure as heck don't have affordable housing. So I stand in favor of providing what's necessary for the people who serve us.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Chris Woods, 157 Fairgrounds.
Mr. Woods, and then
sorry.
and then you, sir.
Jack Weston, I live at 15 A Street, more or less where the Nile and the Amazon rivers converge in the springtime. Just about these vernal pools we're talking about, the pool in my backyard, which is probably 2 to 3 feet deep in the springtime, and is probably about 20 to 30 feet from my kitchen window. I've had waterfowl checking the area out in the springtime. The lady next door to me, going up the street towards that man-made pool at the end of the street, has had a lake in her yard for a good month in the springtime. Being a property owner and dealing with the EPA, it took me 10 years to have the EPA sign off on what the house I had in Henniker, because it should have never been built on these wetlands. And if this was 1960, I believe the mid-60s, when that Page Street development was developed, if that was now, the EPA, I can guarantee it would not let it exist at all. And I'm sure once everything is presented to the EPA about what happens on Page Street and about what happens downriver in the springtime, I can guarantee you there was going to be litigation that'll hold this up for years to come. Because it took me 10 years to have those folks sign off on my house because there was wetland there, and there's stigglers about what the EPA is. And also to mention another thing, light pollution. We've got bears, we've got dumpsters. Geez, there's a lot of kids in the neighborhood. I had a bear in my backyard 2 weeks ago, well, not 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, that chased my girlfriend right off the back deck and proceeded across the street, right at the, the bird feeders, Stu's place right across the street there. So I think there are a lot of other mitigating issues besides, well, there is a lot, and there's a lot of food, there's a lot of different avenues that we're going to have to pursue to negate this whole operation. But I think the EPA is probably, those people that are against this operation is our best avenue to pursue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. And I'm sorry to have
That's okay.
cut you off earlier.
Chris Woods, 157 Fairgrounds. I've addressed the board before regarding the Dave Hall subdivision and BICO. I'm a recipient of stormwater from the area we're talking about. If I may clarify to the board, where the water leaves this proposed subdivision, it follows a path parallel to Fairgrounds Road through the Dave Hall subdivision and crosses right next to our driveway. There is, I believe, a 12-inch, perhaps 16-inch culvert there. So I would like to present to the board tonight a few photographs showing you a flooding from a recent event, spring either a year or two ago, showing you the extent of water on my property. It's not minor. It ran for 2 days straight. I want to impress that there is a baseline condition. There's a fair amount of water that's already there in storm events before we even consider any development. And bear in mind that Dave Hall subdivision hasn't yet been built. The BICO subdivision hasn't been built either. So we really don't know the conditions leading up to before this is even built, because I've got these other factors that are unknown at this time. I would like to also emphasize that I think the construction of the swale is only going to accentuate the flow of water through the properties down to me. I mean, it seems clearly that it's a handoff. I had a chance today only to begin to review the drainage plan for this property. It's showing a catch basin of about 3,500 cubic feet. Now, I know I heard tonight from the engineer this is only preliminary, but according to my calculations, that's not enough size nearly to capture a 25-year rainfall event. It's got to be significantly larger. I'm thinking at least 5 times as large, based on some very preliminary calculations today. But
and you said you wanted to present some photos?
Yes, I would. I've got 2 copies of 2 photos. One shows the flooding in the back of our property. You can see there's a fairly large, there's a trailer there that the tire is about, you can see it's about a foot deep based on the tire that's submerged. It's the other.
Now, is this across the road from Fairgrounds? From the
this
development?
Across from the Dave Hall subdivision. There should have been 4 photos.
Is that the farmhouse?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have about 13 acres.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
See it first, maybe
And-
you take a same copy.
And Mr. Woods, we can keep this in the record?
Yes, you can. I put my name on and address on the back.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to speak to this matter? I see a hand, but not a person. Yes.
Hi, I'm Reverend Sarah Stewart. I live at 19 Wentworth Street in Plymouth. I'm also the minister of Star King Unitarian Universalist Fellowship on Fairgrounds Road, and I am speaking for myself tonight, not for my congregation. I really hope that the town can work with the development team to build these units for workforce housing. Ideally, the Bridge House should not be a place for people to live for a long period of time once they've gotten on their feet. Once they've had the excellent services of the Bridge House, there needs to be a place for them to move on to so that the Bridge House is there for emergency situations. And without building this kind of housing in Plymouth, right now there's just not enough properties for people to move into. We are neighbors of the Plymouth Apartments down on Morgan Drive off Fairgrounds Road. We find the families that live in those apartments to be good neighbors. We need that. That's great that that housing is there, but we need more of it. So I support this proposal.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Dick Hanaway. 25 years ago, I heard the same arguments against Plymouth Apartments. and they're good arguments. And I understand people don't want their status quo changed with more housing. They'd rather have the Blackies pay for the taxes for the woods that they have enjoyed for all these years. But in our society, I think we have to reach out to those less fortunate in our community. About 80% over 25 years, people come from our area, contiguous with Plymouth. Most of these people, all of them, have income. We have a 1 to 2 year waiting list. We've never had a vacancy. So if you want to come and live, you're still stuck waiting. We're hoping that these 24 additional family units will make a difference. These are your relatives, your neighbors. You'd be surprised who comes in there. Professionals, daughters who find themselves in an awkward situation with children, and they go and work hard and figure out the transportation and make $6 or $8 an hour, feed their kids. Figure it out. Do the arithmetic. If you don't have this type of housing, what are you going to do? Put them in your own attic? Send them off to the city? I don't think we want to do this as a community. We're talking about our own. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Steve Blanchard, 7 Allen Ave. I think the town really needs to take a look and see if we do indeed already have enough of this type of housing. We, as residents, do not uphold having this type of housing in our backyard. It's a residential area. If they were proposing single-family homes, that was fine. That was the original proposal. I'm not real familiar with the proposal. But as an abutter and a resident, I feel that we need to look at the town as far as what the town has for dwelling. Do not dispute that low-income housing needs to be placed and these people need homes. I'm all for that. Mr. Hanaway, I don't think if this was in your backyard, I don't think you're going to be all for it. So I really think the town ought to take a hard look and see if we do have enough of this type of housing. If not, I believe there's quite a few parcels that are adequate parcels as well. And certainly the drainage issues, which I won't get into because that's already been into. But that's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Ignatius McClellan. I just would like an opportunity as an applicant to look at the photographs, that's all.
Oh, I'm sorry. When you came over, I thought you had gotten them. We have two
Well,
sets.
you should get them through the planner. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
A final comment. In response to what I've heard presented by a few individuals, there's a bit of a contradiction again, and I appreciate your position that the Bridge House offers you a permanent place to go to, which I think, again, we have no argument. I think everybody has a great respect for what you do at the Bridge House.
I'm sorry, can you please identify yourself?
Mr. Hartz? Yep, Joel Hartz.
Oh, okay.
The point, I guess, would be that if it's permanent, we've got 5 families that will be permanently helped by this project. In the interim, you've got a dozen abutters who will be negatively impacted. What I would hope we might consider is that the seller has 80 some odd acres available for sale and for development. Why aren't we putting 7 units where 7 units were going to sit and take the other 20 or 18 units and place them in other areas? We don't need to increase the density so that they shoehorn in 24 units into 5 acres. Why don't they put 25 units over 25 acres? The seller clearly has the wherewithal in the plan to develop the land. So rather than place people in a permanent rental position, why don't we do what it sounds like we want to do, is build affordable housing that people can purchase at a reasonable rate with subsidies and assistance, such that those properties become their own, that grow and appreciate in value, and you have an actual something at the end of your 5 years or 10 years. If you rent for 10 years as a permanent rental, you walk out with nothing but 10-year-old furniture. So I think there's more than one way that this could benefit the community without negatively impacting the abutters to the property.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I've been living in the Plymouth area for over 10 years. I've worked in Plymouth for over 10 years. I'm currently a resident of Plymouth. I have been off and on, but I'm the sort of neighbor that this project would be attracting. I can't afford a house. I work full-time, or I have worked full-time in Plymouth for 10 years. I'm currently finishing my bachelor's degree. But there isn't enough rental in Plymouth for, people who aren't students, who work in Plymouth and otherwise would have to commute to Plymouth from towns like Ashland, Rumney, Ellsworth. We've even been in New Hampton trying to find a place to stay. I'm definitely for this project. We didn't have, the low-end jobs, that a lot of people think that this sort of project would help. But even those people who do work in places like McDonald's and stuff, it doesn't mean that they're going to be, property value lowering neighbors. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Yes, you have something?
Tom Labor, just in regards to the statement about why don't we put them into one of their homes. First of all, are we going to be willing to pay somebody at McDonald's $15 an hour so that they can go buy their own home? And second of all, the Housing First project has done a study, and it shows that compliance with case management actually ends up in a higher rate of people owning their own home in the long run. See, because this would be based upon a median of 30% income. So now we can work with them and we can set up case management so that these people can save their own home. The goal isn't to keep them in these units for the rest of their lives, but to allow them to save up the money so that they can get into home ownership, so that they can become available for other programs that New Hampshire Housing and many other places have available. But we need something in the community that is for workforce housing. We are not talking about transitional housing here. We are not talking about subsidized housing. We are talking about workforce housing. These are the people who are flipping the burgers at McDonald's for us, who are serving our seniors at the senior center. Okay? These are the people who are the base of our community. Why would we not want to put them into a position where they can save their money, work with case managers, and end up owning their own home? Everybody benefits. We now have them on the tax, paying taxes, okay? And we're also taking less money out of the town because maybe you're not aware of it or not, but the town has to give a voucher for these people to go stay at the Bridge House. So it's costing us money for them to get the Bridge House. We put them into their own place, we're not paying that money anymore. And in the long run, they're becoming taxpayers. And in the meantime, they're flipping the burgers for us. All right? They're filling the prescriptions down at Rite Aid for us. It's a win-win situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Houle?
The issue of workforce housing and the need for it has been well documented in this state and in particular in the North Country region in particular for the last 15 years. I was previously associated with North Country Council, as many of you know. And back in the 90s, late 90s, we initiated a workforce housing study funded by the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, among others, as well as North Country Council, that looked at the whole region. And there are documents that are available to the public if they wish to contact North Country Council or go to their website and look at what those studies have revealed. There's been more recent update of those workforce housing needs done by North Country Council. And I think there's even a copy of that report in your own planner's office. Besides that, the town hired Mr. Thibault from Laconia, who is a renowned economist and is probably one of the more knowledgeable people in the state when it comes to economics and housing and wages and the problems associated among those various factors. And that study that he did for the town of Plymouth, that was funded by the municipality and by the school system, again, identified within it the need for diversity of housing to meet the various needs of our residents or people coming into the area to find employment within the employment base of our community. And that includes rental housing, it includes home ownership housing at the entry level, it includes intermediate level housing, and some upscale housing. And I have to say, I think this project is extremely well sited where they've chosen to propose to build it out for the reason that it's in an area that's not too large, but what will be comprised of, when the area is built out, of mixed housing types that cover a pretty broad spectrum of housing needs. And the diversity within a housing neighborhood is an asset, usually, to bringing the neighborhood together in all of its character, and is a benefit to the community from the standpoint of tax base and from the standpoint of services that have to be provided to accommodate that housing. It's higher density, but it's much more efficient building concept than building out over a very expansive area at much larger lot sizes to accommodate only single-family type housing. So I think this is well cited. I think it fits a clearly identified need for this community and for our region. And I think it will be a great enhancement to the neighborhood as well as to the municipality and what it brings to the community in the way of the workforce and revenues to the town.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we've heard quite a wide range and diverse number of topics addressed. Does anybody have anything new to add to this?
Super quick question. Can I ask the board to ask the engineer when the drainage plan final will be available to us, the public?
Well, it certainly will be available as part of the application that they make to us. I don't know if it'll be, would you like to address it being made available sooner?
I believe that part of our intent being here tonight is to hear some more of the facts about that so we can wrap up the design. We will have a very thorough drainage report analysis to accompany our formal submittal. We will need to have state permits from DES regarding their drainage for the site. It was important for us to come here tonight so we get the town engineer looking at this as well, because the town engineer will obviously be looking at and wanting to sign up on our approval. We're hopeful that we'll be coming back in January for a planning board meeting, which would mean that we would be having to file our application by, I believe it's the 5th, is that correct, Miriam, of January? The first week of January. However, that gives us a short period of time right now to get things done. But certainly in the coming weeks we'll be making a formal application. I would think, but.
It sounds like you should check with the town planner periodically. I saw a new hand over here. Yes?
Yes. Jamie Capaccio, I live at 34 Emerson Street in Plymouth. I don't want to speak necessarily for or against this particular application, but in regards to workforce housing, being someone who is in workforce housing essentially, or has been looking for workforce housing, there isn't enough in Plymouth. Recently, my wife, who just spoke, and I were in the need of finding housing in Plymouth, and in fact, we were in the process of applying for Plymouth apartments when we found the place we ended up in, thankfully. It was one of two places in Plymouth that we could afford. I am not flipping burgers at McDonald's or Burger King. That's not to say that people who do work those jobs are bad people or going to be bad neighbors, but I am a white-collar professional who certainly meets the income requirements for Plymouth Apartments, Plymouth Terrace. And I was facing a waiting list when my family was in dire need of housing. We didn't know what we were going to do if we applied for Plymouth Housing and got accepted, and we're on a one-year waiting list for workforce housing, which seemed to be just about our only option in Plymouth. There is not enough, and we are not bad neighbors. And I've spent a lot of time in Plymouth Apartments because I know people who live there. They're good people, they work in the community, some of them have been in the community for years and come from families who've been in the community for years. My wife and I have been here for 12 years. We've worked in Plymouth all those times. There have been times where we couldn't live in Plymouth because we just can't afford it. And there isn't housing for people like us who are workforce people looking for housing. There just isn't enough. We've had to live as far away as Ellsworth, New Hampton, and we were considering Warren this time around because that was where we could find housing. But we worked in Plymouth. My wife goes to school in Plymouth. We were possibly facing having to pack up and go back to Nashville and live with my parents, and I would have to give up my white-collar professional job that provides us benefits that we really need because we just could not find housing near where I worked and where she goes to school, and she would have had to have given up her degree. There is not enough workforce housing.
Thank you.
And I can't afford to buy a house, I'm sorry. It's a great suggestion, but I can't afford it, and even if I could get one with subsidies, I wouldn't want one because I know I couldn't afford to maintain it. I don't make enough, even with a white-collar professional job.
Thank you. Yes.
Frank Miller. I want to speak to the environmental issues and drainage. If you probably didn't really focus on the map that shows the whole area of drainage, watershed area. Without any human intervention in the Fairgrounds Road area, that whole area of approximately 100 acres drained very nicely into the Baker River. Through the process of man's intervention, establishing Fairgrounds Road back in 1760-something or other, we have formed what they're called impoundments. Most of the wetlands and ponds that I hear from the abutters, which you have a problem right now without any construction, you have a drainage issue because people who established the ways and the roads in Plymouth and other towns, but in this particular area, did so without any concern about the natural drainage of a land. And so the existing road infrastructure represents impoundments. That's a classification of a wetlands by the EPA. We have them all over town. When we do not design and do the engineering analysis for drainage from a source of water down to the final area, which would be the river, you will have, if it's not properly engineered, you will have drainage issues. We do have the technology in the engineering science to mitigate drainage issues. There are many new, unique technologies available through the EPA system of mitigation for engineering systems. But we need to recognize that the existing road systems in this area, Fairgrounds, the Page, all these other offshoot roads that accompany this project, represent impoundments because either they have a culvert that's way undersized or no culverts at all, or the whole issue of mitigating the drainage by a single landowner, single homeowner, was not even addressed. Now that we have, since 1970, when the EPA come in, and now that we, through this process of the Planning Board and Zoning Board, recognize that the environmental impact of a single-family home, single-person issue upon a land affects drainage. Now we need to address it. I think we have a problem as it stands without any of this happening. You still have an incomplete drainage plan for what's already built there. We need to now focus what the town and the abutters and or the developers are going to do to mitigate that existing problem, because the way I hear is we're allowing this drainage area to fill up this pond that runs over the roads, and why that's allowed to continue without acknowledging that that's not the type of mitigation that the town would accept on a normal application, and why we allow it to continue it surprises me. I can't believe that that's just allowed to go on without someone saying, gee, we have a problem here. So there's an existing problem of incomplete drainage systems mitigation for the housing, all the landowners that are there right now. And that if this plan were to go forward and they're going to use 2010 EPA, Department of Environmental Service standards, and all of the latest engineering technology to mitigate the drainage issue, which could include rehydration, i.e. you just drill a big shaft down into the soil until you find a perk layer and you rehydrate this water. There are many technologies that are available, and we need to allow the applicant to go provide us their design for how they would mitigate on site those issues. We also need to address the existing lack of engineered draining system for that whole area. It sounds like those homes and the roads and everything were put there, and drainage was not on the list of things to address.
Thank you. And yes.
I just need to set the record straight. Well, first of all, we are supposed to get vouchers for anybody to send somebody to the Bridge House for accounts, but we don't receive them, we request them. I don't know when the last time Plymouth paid 1 penny per person to Bridge House, which is why I do so much fundraising. And secondly, the Bridge House has a minor impact on this project. If we close tomorrow, the need for this type of housing is still going to be there.
Thank you. So,
I have
yes,
just
sir.
one question, if I might. I'm John Bentwood. I'm a resident of Plymouth. I've heard several abutters, I believe, speak about drainage, and it was unclear to me about what their stand was on this project, whether if the drainage issue could be resolved by the engineering, would they then approve the project? And I didn't quite get that from their comments. I'm not expecting you to answer that, but I didn't quite know if anybody wanted to answer that.
What I suspect will happen is that the applicant, having heard the many concerns that were raised with respect to water and engineering and whatnot, will take that those issues into consideration, and they will present a plan that's been engineered that will resolve, I would presume, many of the issues. And if the community feels that they haven't been addressed appropriately, then the community can say that. And then if there are other issues, I imagine that's when those would arise. So, did you have something new? I'd like
Just
to.
a point of information,
Yes.
John. The applicants and the board itself, for those that may not be aware, there was a very thorough natural resource inventory that was completed by the Conservation Commission over a 2-year period here very recently. And I know Paul is familiar with it because he sat on the Conservation Commission when that was being done. But it has documented for this area, as well as all the other areas of our community, for the as-built conditions that we have, what the soil types are, where the wetlands are, what the natural habitat is, and that's all good resource material to relate to this project as well as to any other project that might be coming before you.
Thank you. So just before I close the public hearing, I'd like it to be noted in the record that we did receive a lengthy letter from Ms. Donna Patton, who could not be here, and she included some photographs and some other information. I would say that all of her issues have been touched upon by the public.
Right.
But
I
this will
gave
be
a
part of
copy
the.
to everyone, so please take it back and review it. And then we passed out the photos that were given to us.
Yes, and this will become part of the public record, part of the file. So at 7:57, I'm closing the public hearing and moving the conversation back to the board. Has anything that the public has addressed or anything new come to anybody's mind that they'd like to address towards the applicant? Yes, Mr. Kelly?
I know that a lot of the people that spoke probably have never really experienced any really downward trend in their economic life, but I can tell you myself that people don't know what poor is until they're there, and I've been there. One thing I would like to say is I understand the people need housing. I understand all of that. I also understand there's an economic side of this too for the people that are living already in Plymouth. It is well recorded that any new housing will pay about 70% of the cost of whatever it's going to cost the town for schooling, for busing, for more policemen, more firemen, and everything like that. And you've got 72 new people coming into Plymouth, and that's going to cost the whole town a lot. And it might not be much for the people that are maybe sitting here having extraordinary amount of income coming in, but it does mean a lot for the people up in the Carpenter Trailer Park and some of the low-income housing that is already here. I believe, if Marion can speak for me, that we have an abundance of low-income housing in the town of Plymouth. We also know that not all of these people are going to work in Plymouth. There is Rumney and Holness and Ashland that these people are going by. We also know that that place is about 2 miles out of town, and nobody's going to walk into town or up to Walmart to go to work. They're going to take cars and stuff like that, and they could take cars to Campton and Holness as well. I'm not too sure whether this is home ownership or whether this is rental. I'd like to have somebody answer me that. In other words, the people that are there, is it going to be like a condominium type of thing that they own?
No, it's rental, John.
Rental, that's what I thought. And quite a few of these people have talked as though they are going to be owning these units, and they are not going to. They are going to be renting them. What's that?
It's called homes.
That's right, but it's rentals, right? And I rented for a lot, and I called that home too. I just am worried. We cannot seem. We have to have a balance. We have to have a balance between commercial and residential, in any town it has to. We don't seem to be able to create any new commercial. They shift around town a time. We don't seem to be able to allow commercial business in here so that the people that are in town can earn a living, but we are, God Almighty, getting to residential homes that's going to cost the town money. So economically, I understand about the housing, I understand about the people, I understand how wonderful it would be that everybody had a house. We tried that about 5 years ago, and we got in an awful mess because everybody thought they could own a house. But I'm worried about the economics of Plymouth, because our taxes are one of the highest tax rates in the area. And the more of this subsidy whatever it is, will be more burden on the people in Plymouth than they are right now. And I understand there's some subsidies here, but I also understand these type of houses could be built in Holderness, Ashland, Campton, and those towns don't have a maximum of low-income housing, and I believe that Plymouth is getting right up there to the very top of that crest as far as that is concerned. And the more we put in, the higher our tax rate. The selectmen have worked really, really hard to keep that tax rate down. And they will be the first one to be blamed if it goes up. But it's going to go up if we continue with these subsidy types of policies in Plymouth. Thank you.
Yes, Town Planner?
Yeah, I just want to remind the planning board of what we're looking at. Again, we're getting into a lot of philosophical issues. We're getting into a lot of issues that we shouldn't even be discussing. One is subdivision. Typically, somebody has one lot and they want to split it into many lots. This is the opposite. This is 12 lots. They want to consolidate it into 2. So that's what planning board's to look at, is subdivision. Here, 12 lots going into 2. Just look at that. Does it meet the ordinance requirements? Typically, when you're doing fewer lots, it would meet the requirements. You got to focus on what they're asking for, subdivision. Second is site plan. Site plan, do they meet the zoning ordinance requirements? People did mention density, and they feel that it doesn't meet density requirements. It does meet density requirements. They're not asking for any increase in what the zoning ordinance allows. If people aren't happy with what our zoning ordinance allows, then we need to change the zoning ordinance. But they're not asking for 1 unit more than the zoning ordinance allows. The zoning ordinance allows this density. They're just asking for site plan approval. That means we look at it. Do they meet setbacks? Yes, they exceed the setbacks. Do they meet parking? Yes, they exceed the parking. Do they meet density? Yes, they meet the density. So that's what we have to focus on. We are never supposed to look at who's going to live in the unit. These could be the highest end condominiums. It doesn't matter. That's not what planning board is tasked to look at. You're never to look at that, because that's discrimination, and there's fair housing laws, and we should never discriminate, and I think we got a little bit off track by all this. All we are supposed to do is subdivision, and again, it's 12 lots going to 2, so logically it should meet our subdivision requirements. Usually you go the opposite way, 1 lot into 12. And 2, site plan. If the drainage does not meet federal law, state law, the local law for drainage, then it's denied. He has to meet the drainage requirements. And what the storm drainage requirements are is that he cannot make it worse than it already is. So he can't have more water going off the site than what goes off it now. Now, in terms of something that exists, previously, according to the RSA, he's not allowed to interfere with what the existing flow is. If there's a stream, he can't impound it. So there's 2 things. There's the existing situation, and then there's what he is going to create. With putting up those buildings, he is going to design it so that it doesn't increase the flow of water. And if he doesn't, and our engineer will review that to make sure he meets our requirements, then it's denied. He has to meet all of the requirements. And that's all we're supposed to be looking at, not into all this philosophical of do we need it or not. Since you did mention it, and Bill Houle did mention the housing needs assessment, this is done by North Country Council. I do have a copy of the study, and everyone's welcome to look at it. I looked at what they said about Plymouth, because the people that I talked to that call me up, some are saying, we've got plenty of affordable housing, and then some are saying, we don't. Well, what are the actual census numbers? What do the actual numbers say? Not someone's opinion, not someone's feeling, not someone's experience. And I'm just reading right from it, okay? This is page 42 of the Housing Needs Assessment. It says the Plymouth LMA, that's the labor market area, has the highest percentage of homeowners that overspent on housing than any other LMA in the North Country. They're supposed to look at the whole region. The LMA had the 3rd highest percentage of renters who overpaid in the region. The town of Plymouth accounted for 52% of the renters spending over 30% of their income on housing, but only accounted for 40% of the total renter stock in the LMA. This is the most recent study that was done. This study, just using the hard facts, hard numbers, saying that we do not have affordable housing here. People are overspending. 52% are overspending.
Thank you. Any other questions?
But as I
for-
said, we're not supposed to even look at that, just subdivision and site plan.
Any other questions for the applicant from the board? Yes, Mr. Ahern.
I have a question for the planner. When, I guess it was Blackie, this is prior to my being on the board, but Blackie subdivided that into 12 lots, that
Right.
area that we're talking about. And part of the reason that he got 12 lots is because he did a cluster development, as I understand it.
Correct.
Meaning he had to set aside land in other areas of his entire property.
Correct.
To make those 12 units possible.
Correct.
So now we're looking at, as the planning board, do we take that in consideration that there was land set aside for the 12 units, or do we now have to take a look at, on its own, 4.1 acres, and now look at that as just one piece of land, irrespective of any other open space set aside for a prior project?
Right, and that's a really interesting question. What I did was look at the original and see what the requirements are. If he was putting that on what was designated open space, red flag, you can't do that. But he's not putting it on where there's designated open space. His open space is still intact. And then I looked at all the other requirements, and the other requirements are about the 50-foot buffer, and he's honoring it even though he doesn't technically need to. But if we wanted to go with that, what this development is needs to honor what Blackie's requirements are, this development is honoring that, because he's going to put the 50-foot buffer, which he's not required to do by our zoning ordinance, but that was put on Blackie. And then he, on Blackie's development, they said 20-foot spacing between the buildings, and they're way exceeding that. They're 55, one building is 55 feet away, and the rest, and something else, I think it's 7, I had it in my report. 90 feet. So they go from 55 feet to 90 feet away. So they're meeting the Blackie requirements. Oh, and then also about multifamily, and I thought that was interesting. When I looked at the Blackie development, and remember we're talking about a big development, multi-phases, he had multifamily in there. I think it was 92 multifamily units. So they proposed multifamily. They were high-end, but as I said, we're not supposed to be looking at rent or the type of person that might look at that. That's discrimination. This, instead of putting it over there, they're putting multifamily here. Blackie, the project got approved in 2005. So much has changed, and the market just crashed out. I don't even know if he sold his first home. He tried, he did it as single family. He tried to see if there's a market. Now it's 5 years later. He hasn't been able to sell it, so the market's changed. So what I'm thinking is that he's going to have to amend that plan that he brought in anyhow. So this is, you know, if you want to view it as an amendment, it's an amendment. In terms of the other ones, yeah, they were single family, but he also had a multifamily component to it. So we're just supposed to look at density, and this meets our density. It's not even a cluster development. So
could, in the zone that this is being proposed, the zone is
agriculture.
Agriculture.
Yeah.
And it has town water and town sewer, correct?
Correct.
So the density is a quarter acre?
The density is...
And we have how many acres? 4 point?
Okay.
4.9.
4.9 acres.
For the single-family home, this is interesting, but this is our zoning ordinance, so I can only deal with our zoning. Our zoning ordinance is if it's a single-family home, you need 1 acre, okay?
That's in the rule.
That's in the agricultural.
Yeah.
But, and this is in our existing ordinance, if you're doing multifamily and you do 6 units, you need 53,560 feet for 6 units, so that's a little bit over an acre. That's what's in here. So they're not asking for cluster development, and he's not asking to go 1 foot more than what he's allowed with his density, and that's in the agricultural zone.
So there's almost 5 acres, and if it was 5 acres, then he could put 5 six-packs.
5 times 6, yeah.
30.
But he's putting 4 six-packs on. It might be useful, Mr. Kelly raised the question earlier about impacts on sewer and water, and I don't know if I remember this correctly or not, but when the Vico development came in front of the board, I think somebody from Water and Sewer said something to the effect that the more people that are paying into the system, the better for the town, because the pipes are already there. That's a very different memory, I think, than what Mr. Kelly had with respect to 80% capacity or something. So we might just want to clarify, get some clarification from the staff report that you have.
I talked to Kevin Lincoln. He came to our meeting. We discussed it directly. He said we've got the capacity. I mean, he's the person to ask. In terms of Lowe's, I think there was some misinformation going on. When I talked to Water and Sewer directly, they said they do have the capacity. Some people were spreading rumors or something, saying that we didn't, but we did. I mean, when I talked to Kevin Lincoln, who's the authority, so we have capacity for Lowe's and we have capacity for this. The developer will be paying for the connection and the upgrade. I mean, they'll have to upgrade it to bring it in, but they're aware of that, and they've talked to Kevin Lincoln.
You'll have that in a staff report, that it'll be there in black and white that we could read?
Yeah, I was
going to ask.
Put that in there.
Could you get a letter from him, signed by him?
Yeah, I think that's what Mr. Kelly's looking
for. Yeah, I just,
That's what I'm looking for,
yeah, all I said was, yeah, the only suggestion he said was look at that shorter stub where it's a little bit green, and he'll talk to Jeff Lewis about, Jeff's talking about maybe going on Allen. I mean, they'll have to decide which one makes more sense.
But I would like a letter saying that they will not affect the capacity of the water.
Sure, I can get a formal letter.
I wonder if the applicant might be able to provide, when it is time for the actual application, maybe a comparison of what the impermeable surface area would have been if there were all these houses on it versus how much impervious surface there will be through these buildings. It might be interesting to see just how much of an impact is changed. For better or for worse in terms of overflow.
Just one more thing. The town planner said that they are reducing the lots, but I'm not too sure whether reducing the lot is the primary problem here. Is it increasing the use of the land of that lot?
Right. You're pointing out that they're eliminating lots but increasing people.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Which will affect the town more than whether there's 5 houses on there or 20 houses on there. It will affect more of the services, which is the police, fire, and everything like that, than in the number of houses on that lot is reduced, yes, but the amount of services and everything else that the town is going to have to provide is going to be twice the amount.
When I worked in the planning world in New Jersey, there was a book by somebody named Harvey Moskowitz that actually had different multipliers that you would use. Do we have a multiplier for New Hampshire communities?
Well, I mean, not that I'm aware of, but the way that I do it here in Plymouth is I have this technical review committee, and on that is Water and Sewer, who's ever in charge of that. Police chief, the fire chief, the engineer, building inspector, highway manager, and school superintendent. So I contact all of those, and all of those department heads, and send them the plan, and then they just give me their own assessment on if they can meet the capacity or not. I understand about the multiplier, but if you can have Kevin Lincoln, who knows exactly his particular capacity exactly on Fairgrounds Road versus a multiplier, it works even better. The multiplier will just sort of give you a general idea, like thumbs up, thumbs down. But what's even better is Kevin Lincoln knowing that exact line that goes there. He's got it all mapped out, what is where.
And you referenced in your report, Mr. Holleran had also, talked about numbers and impact. So maybe if they sign a form or they give you a little email that says what they expect, that might be useful for some board members to see. Mr. Ahern?
Allen Avenue was referenced once or twice. When Blackie was doing his subdivision, was he making use of Allen Avenue at all, or was that just for the existing homes?
No.
Oh. And why wasn't he using Allen Avenue at the time? When he
His development had a different orientation, so it went down.
Was there talk about using it at all back?
But I think that's why we heard from the public that there was an impending or actual lawsuit about that issue, which they'll have to reconcile.
Could a planning board give an approval?
I'm sorry, give
Could the
approval?
planning board even could it give approval?
Well, on our
If
tax
there's-
records, it shows that Blackie owns Allen Avenue. He pays taxes on Allen Avenue. So our tax records show that Blackie owns it. In terms of adverse possession, I mean, that's a lawsuit, that's private, it doesn't involve us. Our tax records show Blackie's owning it. His plan, he showed a different road coming in Woodland Way, and it wasn't going to go through Allen, it was going a different way.
Yes.
Ignatius McGlone, I only want to, for the record, say to the extent Mr. Philbrook made a representation about why Mr. Blackie didn't use Allen Avenue because he claimed he didn't own it, I would just tell you that we dispute that, and I want to make sure from the board perspective that that fact is not out there, because that's not our understanding.
Right, and that's your issue.
Yep, I just wanted, but he put it on the public record, I want to make sure we keep it
Well,
on
the
the
issue
public record,
between
too.
us and
Right.
Mr. Blackie, not between him, he has no legal standing in this.
Right.
That's incorrect, to the extent I work with the
You do
applicant.
not
I
own the
understand.
land.
I think we're all in agreement that it's staying on that side of this table. Yes, Mr. Kelly.
Could we, as long as, if there was a court case or is a court case, could we accept that by having some type of legal dispute?
If you wanted to, as a select member, want to ask the town attorney to look into that, that's probably appropriate. We're really done with the public
I
hearing.
just would like to submit a letter from Attorney McCormick regarding the ownership of Allen Avenue.
Why don't you hold on to that and give it to the town planner at the close of our meeting? 'Cause I'd like us to move along with where we are. But I'm sure the town planner would appreciate having that as part of the files. Are there any other questions for the applicant or the town planner, or to be discussed about this design phase review? Does the applicant have any questions of us before you leave? Okay, well, I hope that you heard lots of information that will be useful.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Are you from Plymouth? Do I know your dad, or are you from Woodstock Lane? Okay. There was another guy, would probably be your age.
There appears to be
Three sons all
an inherent break in the planning board. So we'll take a 5-minute break at 8:20 and reconvene at 8:25.
I gotta go.
Mass exodus.
Okay, it is 8:25, and I'm going to call the board back to order and continue with our new business. The only other item of new business is proposed zoning ordinance text and map amendments. We have discussed these, or at least most of these, in the past, and we're bringing these forward now to get public input. Have some further discussion as to whether we want to move forward and put this on the for a town meeting. So I think I'll turn the table over to the town planner to. Well, do we need to walk? What's the best way to go about this? So let's have a board consensus here. How should we move? We have some people in the audience who I'm sure would like to speak to some of these issues. Do we want to go one by one and have a public hearing on each one? Or a public hearing on the whole kit and caboodle?
I would say go one by one.
One by one? Right. All right. I see some other nodding heads, and so we'll move that. We'll proceed that way. So I guess the first item, is this, Miriam, is this the same order that the public would have the list of items, starting with duplex housing versus two-family?
I actually didn't list it all out in the public notice. I just said amendments.
Oh, okay.
So that's the way we left it, because I had to have the attorney look at it and wait for his comments back. So now, any of the public that was interested in picking it up, I put that in the ad, contact me, and we did have some people from the public come and pick it up. So
it probably would be helpful then to go over the essence of each one of these before we have the public hearing
sure,
on it.
Right.
So why don't I turn the table over to you to do that for us?
Okay. And what I put before everyone's desk was, it's the latest version. So there were some, I was just talking to the attorney, and he made some little tweaking to it. So this is different than what was mailed out to you.
Okay.
Some of them. And I'll try to point out what was different. The first one is duplex versus two-family dwelling.
And so we're on the same page. This would be version 12/17/09 4.0?
Yeah, 4.0. And 4.0 really just indicated it was at 4 o'clock that I changed that one, so I was almost going to put 4 o'clock. But he didn't have any change with duplex versus two-family dwelling. We're all on the same page with that. And what that was that we have two definitions in the zoning ordinance, and it defines the duplex house that one side is owner-occupied versus the two-family, both could be renters or both could live independently. I don't even know if that's legal. That you really shouldn't, when you build a single-family home, you don't assess if it's renter-occupied or owner-occupied. We don't do that in zoning. So that's why I had issue with even if we should define that, because as I said, we don't do that with a single-family home. Oh, is it rented or is it owner? It doesn't matter. So what our suggestion was to remove the definition of duplex and remove it from the table. There was inconsistencies with that. So our proposal is to remove duplex housing and just leave in the two-family housing and keep it exactly the way it stands right now.
And of course, when you say that, you mean we're going to remove the language of duplex housing, but duplex houses can still be built.
You would still allow duplex housing. You would still allow an owner to be on one side or a renter on both sides. It doesn't matter. We never look at
We're just going to use two-family dwelling to capture that from now on.
Correct.
Is there any comments or issues from the board before we open this up to a public hearing?
Why are we doing that? Why are we eliminating one of those?
Well, we're eliminating the term so we don't have redundancy and therefore complexity that could confuse people. So we're streamlining it.
But a duplex, to me, is two houses within one, and it's built as a two-family house.
And that would fall under the two-family dwelling.
Two-family.
And a two-family dwelling could very well be either a duplex by people having 2 or 4 families in each duplex, right? Or a 2 to 4 family house, single house, could have only 2 to 4 people living in it, right?
Well, I'll just read, I can read the definition. Dwelling two-family, it's a residential building designed for or occupied by two families.
Right.
So it's two, living independently of each other in individual dwelling units, each with a separate entrance.
That's
That's what we call the two-family dwelling.
Okay.
The duplex, what we have now in our ordinance is any dwelling having living quarters, one of which must be owner-occupied as the owner's primary residence for two families with separate entrances at the ground or first floor. So the two entrances is the same, but now we're saying you must be owner-occupied. So now we're differentiating, and then when we do that, then we allowed it in some districts, but we didn't allow it in the other. And for example, multifamily, okay, the multifamily district, MFR. We allow two-family as a permitted dwelling, but if one happens to be one unit's owner-occupied, all of a sudden then it's special exception. So why are you being more stringent if the owner is actually living on one side?
And Mr. Kelly, I think also the issue came up if you build a duplex and it falls under the duplex category because it's owner-occupied. What happens when you sell your home or you move out?
Or you rent it.
So this is going to actually just make it easier for everybody. But you still will be able to have a duplex.
They were penalizing someone if the owner wanted to live in it, then it was penalized, and you had to go through more hoops.
I guess with Plymouth being a university town now, and with the way Plymouth seems to work sometimes, it could slide from an owner occupied building to a bunch of students being in there. That's my own concern.
Right. And my first proposal was to make, anytime you had the two families district, make it special exception every time. But that got shut down by planning board last time. They said just leave it the way it is. So, we could either leave it the way it is or go back to the original, which was always make it special exception and then look at it case by case. But they shouldn't have been treated differently just because the owner's living in there and then you're making it more restrictive.
One last question, is this the same planning board that shot it down this last time?
Well, you weren't here.
You weren't here. But everybody else was.
Everybody
so it was minus John Kelly.
I was. Were you part of the planning board? when it
Yeah.
was shot down?
We're talking
Yeah, it
about
was
the
last week.
last work session.
We're talking about 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Everyone was here except you.
All right.
Just 2 weeks ago. Rhonda was here, and Bob Dragon was here. Everyone was here except you.
All right, okay.
Any other conversation about this? Okay, seeing that it is 8:32, I'll open up this issue to a public hearing. Does anybody in the audience wish to speak to this issue? Yes, Mr. Kent.
David Kent,
Judge Hand.
Plymouth. I would only suggest that the original intent of this, and maybe it's a little mixed up right now, and I would ask you to straighten out, was it gives the neighbors an opportunity when you ask for a special exception to agree or disagree with what people really want to do. There's no question in my mind, you may disagree with me, but the impact of an owner-occupied second unit is very different than a non-owner-occupied two-family. And in a single-family residential zone, that could offer neighbors significant protection. So I would suggest...
Correct. But why was, if it's owner-occupied, it's more
If you're going to
restrictive?
correct it, you don't have to correct it by getting rid of it. You can correct it and make it protect better. That's my suggestion.
That was my proposal, yes.
Make it work better. It was designed for a reason. Maybe it's mixed up. We'll straighten it out in a way that it accomplishes the reason that it was in there in the first place.
So would it be fair to characterize your suggestion as that what in our current law is duplex house is more strict, harder to get because it's special exception, but two-family dwelling is not, that we should, so your suggestion is that we should flip it around?
Right, I mean, I totally agree. That was my proposal 2 weeks ago. Well,
Did I do that? You're looking at me.
the planning board.
Any other comments on this issue from, yes?
There was a criticism before that it's too much work to do this. Well, I would say no. Give the neighbors a chance to have their word.
No. It was not too much work. What I'm saying is we were more restrictive if an owner occupied it.
No. There was a comment made, too many applications. This is a way of eliminating some unnecessary applications.
Okay, well, I didn't say that.
Don't look at that. Look at the neighbors and say, give them a chance to talk.
Any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 8:35. Come back to the board.
Okay, so again, the proposal is, what I had 2 weeks ago was have special exception anytime we look at a two-family dwelling, or leave it at the existing wording for two-family dwelling, which allows permitted in the multifamily, the agricultural, the CI, and the village commercial.
So is there a sense among the board that, hearing from the public and from and remembering the planner's insight of weeks ago, that we should continue to keep duplex house crossed out and everything along that line, but we should also change two-family dwelling so that it is special exception in all the places it now says permitted? Mr. Ahern?
I think I agree with Judge Ken as far as if there is an owner-occupied half, boy, it makes a huge difference when the owner's there. But his concern about the single-family residential was addressed, and with two-family dwelling, whether it's two separate, neither one of them is the owner, it's still only allowed by special exception. Is that the way that I read it here?
Only in the
proposed amendment?
In the multifamily, the agricultural, the CI, and the village commercial, it would be permitted.
Correct, but in the single-family residential, it would be by special exception.
Right, special exception in single-family, right.
At least in the residential neighborhoods, it would
Right.
still have some protection. Whereas there was, either way, it was a duplex or a two-family dwelling, it was always special exception, single-family residential.
I think the other way around is take and let it be permitted in all those other zones, the owner-occupied one, but by special exception in the single-family zone.
That was my original proposal.
And that's fun. You were brilliant, obviously.
Mr. Sutcliffe and then Mr. Wilson.
Well, even in a permitted zone, it would require planning board approval to build or to have a significant change of use in the event that you were to take a single-family residence and make it two-family. The special exception just adds the layer of the zoning board of adjustment as well. So you have a butter notification either way, no, if it was a new building?
But the zoning board could say no.
Well, it would just be site plan review, you wouldn't review the use. Special exception, you review the use. Site plan, you're just looking at setbacks. I mean, again, with like what we just had, you're just supposed to be looking at setbacks and if it meets the zoning ordinance requirements, not the use.
Mr. Wilson?
I just re-raised the issue that we talked about in the work session, and that's the difficulty with duplexes. If one side is owner-occupied, I think it's viewed as a good thing, but how are we going to track the progress of the occupancy of a home? If an owner decides to move out and then just to rent the unit that he was living in, it's no longer owner-occupied, does he have to come forward and apply for some change of use? I mean, it seems like it's a complicating issue with this duplex category.
Would that, when you change use of a building, that can trigger site plan review.
Right.
But what do you do if
Right,
somebody dies and it gets passed on? And you say it's a change of use and it doesn't meet the duplex, it has to be demolished.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why we shouldn't have that other definition. However, we could look at, as I said, right now, two-family dwelling. If we want to make more of them as special exception instead of permitted, that's, we could look at that.
Yes, Mr. Ahern.
I've kind of already said it, and I probably shouldn't say it again, but we are protecting the single-family residential zone by making it only allowable by special exception.
Right, that's the existing, right.
So, and they were permitted already before in the other zones, with the exception of HC and ICD. So I think the protection is there.
There isn't a groundswell of movement from the board yet as to where they want to go. Where you want to go.
Can there be some clarification?
Sure.
And bring this issue back?
This is the third time we've looked at it, though.
Well, fourth time would be really good. I like it. But, Judge Kent has a concern, and I think a lot of people are along with his thoughts. And if we can clarify it a little bit more, I think probably it would be better for everybody.
Well, what's unclear, I guess?
Well, we've had 4 different opinions of what it is, so somebody must be unclear.
I think we've had 4 different opinions of what it should be, but I think it's pretty clear, what we have and what we're getting rid of, and the question is getting rid of this definition, getting rid of something that the town holds dear and needs?
I think that Judge Kent is right, is that if you have an owner-occupied building, whether you have another rental somewhere within that building, you have a different situation than if you had renters on the building and a person owning that building that doesn't even live in Plymouth, and especially in a university town. It could be a tremendous impact. And so I think probably there should be some type of conversation along the way with the neighbors and so forth to allow them to say whether they want to have it or not.
Well, I agree with you completely about the neighborhood input and the community development that can go along with it, which is why I think it's so crucial that the two-family dwelling still has the special exception if you're trying to build one of these places in a single-family residential district. The way we're proposing, but because of those very same concerns, if you have a duplex and then it doesn't become a duplex, you're in a bind.
Well, you're not quite as far as a bind because you now are not coherent with the single-family house if you got renters in there, right? Well, two renters with no owner occupied.
But what do you tell the people to? you have to find, let's say I'm in the owner's side and I pass away and I pass it on to my daughter who's living in another state and she doesn't want to move here. So she has to find specifically a buyer who will agree to live in that house, or she has to tear it down?
You want to honor a single-family zoning, yes.
But it wouldn't be single-family, it's
You
two.
have to have that power to be able to say, you know, that's the same idea as if I have a house here in Plymouth and I pass on and somebody wants a slaughterhouse there, then you can't tell him, well, you can't have that slaughterhouse here. And that's going to extremes, but the fact is, they have changed the use of that, and the planning board and all the different layers of municipal government should have the right to say no. You are in a single-family housing.
So your house will just go vacant and be an eyesore to the community until the right buyer comes along?
It might be the store was up there on Highland Hill until the right buyer came along, or the town told them to tear it down.
But I think stores and homes are pretty different.
Well, this is an empty building.
There's absolutely no way for me to track that. There's just no way for me to track that. You could buy a single-family home, and then you can decide you want to rent it. I don't know about that.
So
you don't
what's
need
good
any
in the law?
permit? Well, that's why I'm talking about eliminating it, unless the only other way you can address it, that's why I said eliminate that definition. The only other way to address it is if you do special exception. And then if we did it as special exception and they said, well, I'm owner occupied and I will live in it and I will accept that as a condition, then you can do it. It's accepted as a condition for his special exception. Otherwise, we can't do it. If it's a permitted use, it's a permitted use. There's no way for me to track it's owner occupied or the person died or now he's renting it. It doesn't come through my office. They don't ask my permission. There's no way for me to track that.
Let me ask one.
There's single-family homes that are rented.
How do you control more than 3 people, unrelated people living in the same house? How do you track that?
Well, that we can track because we can see who's on the rental agreement, and I mean, it's not the same thing.
If 2 people are renting the house, can't you look at the rental agreements on that?
Oh my God.
You know,
No, I can't.
I don't understand it. You know, if you have rental agreements, and you got 2 rental agreements in a single house, you say you can track that. But now you say you can't track it.
No? Make a comment?
Yes, and then I'll let Mr. Keefe make his comment too that he wanted to make. Oh.
You know, first of all, in terms of your problem, you die and then people don't die. You do the same thing you would do in any other place. If the person isn't going to own or occupy, they would have to come back and apply for a special exception to have a 2-family house there. And the neighbors would then have input in terms of that ought to be or ought not be granted. No different than if it had just been built.
Right, you can only do it through special exception.
That's right. So that solves that particular kind of a problem. It isn't really a problem. Now, what happens if the neighbors present a good case that this shouldn't be a 2-family because of the layout of the land or the impact on the neighbors? The board could deny that special exception, say, no, there's a good reason this is owner occupied because of the unique nature of that particular piece of property. The single-family zone deserves that kind of protection, in my view. I think some of you agree with that. Some of you don't. I know, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, the single-family zone has a special exception. I don't think anyone's arguing that.
But if you get rid of owner-occupied duplex, so there is no longer an owner-occupied duplex, there's no more any special exception for an owner-occupied duplex.
That's okay.
It's a special exception for anything.
Two-family.
Because it's a 2-family.
Any 2-family at
By
that point.
eliminating duplex, then by default, that becomes a two-family.
Two-family, and they go
Requires
through for,
special
so
exception.
all 2-family comes through as special
But
exception.
you're not encouraging anybody to have an owner-occupied piece of property. And that isn't something...
Right, and
which the
before it
neighbors
discouraged it, the existing ordinance discourages it.
Well, you could encourage it when they come for the special exception.
Correct.
I mean, it would be something that you looked at, and criteria of the special exception would be the effect on the neighbors. I would hesitate to take the opposite side of that coin and say in multifamily it should not be permitted. It should be a special exception when a 6-unit building is permitted. I mean, agricultural possibly, kind of on the fence there as to special exception versus permitted. I don't think you're going to make anyone mad in civic institutional permitting this or village commercial.
Right, agriculture is probably the only one that do we want to look at, instead of having a permitted use, having a special exception in the agricultural zone? Because we have a 1 acre minimum lot size. So we're talking about density.
1 acre in town?
1 acre if it's in the agricultural zone.
All right. But aren't we talking about single-family residential zone? Or this duplex?
No, I'm talking about
Isn't that what-
the agricultural zone. So that's 1 acre.
Isn't that what Judge Kent was talking about? Not agricultural zone?
They're not going to maintain the duplex, John, in any form.
Well, not in any, it will be two-family.
Would it help to keep the language in there that says may include a duplex house, just to be a beacon to those people looking for duplexes that they feel welcome?
Okay, but the dictionary definition of duplex house does not mean that one side has to be owner-occupied. I mean, that's unique to Plymouth to say, okay, duplex means one side's owner-occupied.
You, Mr. Ahern.
Did the town attorney comment on this? You said that about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, no, he said this one was fine.
And he was in agreement that we needed to kind of not have both?
Correct. Don't
Okay.
do
Then
it by tenancy.
I'm
Your definition by tenancy.
Judge Kent, David mentioned, has a good point, but I think that the town attorney is the person that we really need to listen to on this, and it'd be nice to make it nice and simple, and boy, I'd love to move this along.
Miriam, what's the procedure is that we will continue this to another public hearing?
Correct.
And then we will just make, at that time, vote whether we want to put it on a
Right.
warrant article.
For the warrant article, you have to have one public hearing. It's optional if you can have two public hearings. I scheduled our public hearing early enough so we could do the two, because I just think it's better if we have at least two public hearings on it.
Okay, so Mr. Kelly, you will get your chance to study this and get some more community input perhaps on it. Is there any other discussion on this possible warrant article? No. Do we feel generally comfortable in keeping it the way it is, the way it was massaged at the last meeting? Yes, Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, just question what that means, the way it is.
The way
the way that it exists or the way that it's proposed?
The way that it has been proposed, so with various words and exceptions crossed out. Okay, that seems to be the consensus, but we'll find out at another meeting. Town planner, would you like to bring us through the accessory structure setback?
Yeah, I was just looking at definition. We could say, one side may be owner-occupied, but I just don't think we should get into that. We can get into it as a special exception, as a condition.
I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, all right, I'm still lingering over there, but okay. Accessory structure setback, okay. So this is reflecting the changes we had 2 weeks ago, okay? And that was that an accessory structure, I'm looking at the proposed amendment side, that do not require a building permit may be allowed in the required yard setback area of all zones by special exception from the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Okay. So and then I added this wording because this was brought up too. Accessory buildings that do not exceed 1 story in height and do not require a building permit may be permitted to locate no closer than 5 feet from the side or rear property line and no closer than 30 feet from the front property line. Accessory buildings are permitted only by special exception in the Village Commercial District. Okay, so what we're allowing is, we were talking about the small accessory building like a storage shed. Let's say it's 10 by 12. Doesn't require a building permit. The existing ordinance would have required them to get a special exception.
Could you remind us all what square footage kicks off needing a building permit?
I think it's 120 square feet. So I just used the wording of does not require a building permit instead of putting in the square footage, and then next year a building permit changes. So I'm just tying it to, you check with the building inspector, he tells you straight off if it requires a building permit or not. Off the top of my head, I think it's 120 square feet, a 10 by 12. Because we were getting a lot of requests for storage sheds that they didn't want to meet 15 feet, which seems more than, it was exorbitant. 15 feet rear setback, 15 feet side setback for the storage shed, and then requiring them to get the special exception.
Might it be more clear if you're, in your last statement, if it said accessory buildings are permitted in every zone except in the village commercial district where they need a special exception? Because you could read this as that this is the only place that they're allowed, and they're allowed by special exception.
Sure.
If I'm conveying correctly the intent.
Sure, I'll add that.
Yeah. Any other issues? Yes, Mr. Ahern?
I'd like to ask the planner, if it doesn't require a building permit, wouldn't it be just considered personal property?
I don't
understand your question myself.
I'm wondering about that. If it isn't permanently affixed to the ground,
but it could
is
be
it considered real estate?
But over a certain size square footage, you would need to get a building permit.
Correct.
But I'm talking, you get a Lowe's shed or a Home Depot little shed that you can move on blocks and move from spot to spot, and it's below the 125 threshold. Isn't that considered personal property?
That's what I'm asking.
Okay, but regardless, I mean, the way it stands right now, you have to go before the zoning board of adjustment if you want to locate it closer than 15 feet from your side and rear property line. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, we have required people that wanted to do a 8 by 10 to have to go before the Board of Zoning Adjustment to get the special exception because they wanted to put it in the setback area.
So, Mary, we're
getting to the same point.
That pertains to the building. In other words, whether it's personal property or not personal property, what you're saying is any structure that could be a shed could not be moved closer than what you proposed there, no matter whether it's personal property or just whatever it was.
Right. I mean, right. You could take it that a swing set shouldn't needs to meet 15-foot setbacks.
Right.
But since I mean, this is just clarifying it so that, okay, now we know if it doesn't require a building permit, it wasn't clear before.
And you're not saying that a swing set is an accessory building? You're not?
Well, no, now we're not.
Okay.
Now we're not. Before it was.
Let me ask you a question. If I want to build a shed and I want to put a foundation under it, do I have to get a building permit?
It would depend on your square footage.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, depends on your square footage.
All right, so it's 8:55, and I'll open this up to a public hearing. Does anybody in the audience wish to speak to this? Seeing none, it's still 8:55. I'll close. Oh, Judge Kent.
I just got to tell you about some situations that I've run into on the same sort of a thing. We don't have any kind of setback between buildings on the same lot. And there are people that I know of in some towns, I haven't seen it here, where they put it because of this minimum setback. It starts at the line, goes up a full story, creates a garage that comes within an inch of the house, and they call it an accessory building. The impact on the neighbor is horrific as a result of that. So I think I'd need to know what are the requirements for a building permit pretty definitely before I'd want to sign on to not arguing about this thing, because I've seen this kind of thing abused.
You would need a building permit to build that.
Neighbors, my kitchen window suddenly has a thing in front of it, and that's no good. And I didn't have any chance to even know that was going to happen until plunk, it's there. And we've seen spike fences in this town, doing the same sort of thing. So.
Well, this isn't a fence, and this will require that structure has to come before,
No, not if
get
it's,
it.
Not if it's
Not if it's less than 100 and...
Not for the size.
And it sounds like
a garage probably would. I don't know what the size.
120 square feet is 10 feet by...
Right.
10 by 12.
By
That's
12
the question
feet.
of how you site it. If it can be a story high, that's a significant.
Frank's got something.
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Well, first of all, there are several questions about personal property was taxable, and so on. A structure that is used to house personal property, such as an accessory structure, once placed on the surface with or without a load-bearing foundation, is a taxable event. Okay, so it's taxed as a shed, a storage container. The fact that storage sheds, only utility programs they have is electricity. They don't have sewer or water, so it's not considered a living structure. Whether or not it's, the other thing was that these accessory structures are single floor, single story, and that's why the 120-foot square feet, 10 by 12, on a normal 612 pitch roof is only going to be so high. Okay, that's why it's in the International Building Code, which now the town is approved part of. It's something that a person can readily put together, pre-manufactured, and locate on their property. Obviously in single-family residential zones where you're very close, and the impact of having even a 10 by 8 by 12 show up out somebody's window is definitely would be an issue for the neighbors. There's two parts here. One is whether or not what kind of structure this is, and it's not a livable structure. It's an accessory, movable structure that may or may not have a concrete block foundation, or it could be pressure-treated wood foundation. That's the 120 square foot is I think the key. And whether or not in the single-family residential zone, would be an impact requiring a special exception, which I think kind of violates the whole intent of the change. But that's.
Mr. Keefe.
Since we're talking about it now, I lived in a property, which I no longer do, in Plymouth, but there was a grandfathered house next to me, literally 12 inches over the property line. I could conceivably have constructed a 20-foot long by 6-foot wide wood storage building and effectively blocked all light from ever accessing this property. Maybe out of spite, maybe not, but we won't go there. But so in Plymouth, we have many grandfathered properties that are very tight to the property line. So if you suddenly allowed structures of 120 square feet in any size, shape, or fashion, a story high, we could open a door for some pretty interesting spite actions in the community. Just a thought. I happen to live in one of those situations, so I can remember it.
Okay. Let me clarify.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that. I was responding to Judge Kent's idea of living this far. It would be 5 feet.
Between the house and the accessory building, so the result was.
Right. This says it would be 5 feet,
No,
so you wouldn't have an inch.
I was talking about the safety concerns where you could have the accessory building so close to the house. There's no limitation.
Oh, you're right. I was looking on the wrong side of the accessory building. Yes, town planner, and then.
Okay. We have a definition of structure accessory in the zoning ordinance. Anything constructed or erected with a fixed location on the ground, which is subordinate to and detached from, but located on the same lot as the principal structure, the use of which is customarily incidental and secondary to that of the principal structure. Accessory structure shall include, but not limited to, fences over 4 feet high, pools, and sheds. So that's our definition. In terms of regulating a structure that doesn't require a building permit, I mean, if they call the building inspector first and say, can I install this? Does this require a permit? And he says no, then, I want to be fair with the way that I enforce the zoning ordinance. I don't want to be penalizing people that ask the question or ask me versus asking the building inspector. If he's saying they don't need a permit, I think it makes more sense that if they don't need a permit, they don't need a permit. Instead of, well, you don't need a permit, but you still have to go through the zoning.
Mr. Blaine?
I'm not sure how I
Attorney Blaine.
read this and what I hear from up front either. In one of these, it says that an accessory structures that do not require a building permit may be allowed in the required yard setback of areas of all zones by special exception from the zoning board of adjustment. And then the next sentence, I'm not sure why it's there. The accessory buildings that do not exceed 1 story in height do not require a building permit may be permitted to locate no closer than 5 feet from the side or rear property line, no closer than 30 feet from the front property line. Does that mean in the second sentence that they don't go for the special exception? Or,
Right. They don't go for the special exception.
So it says in one that they have to go for the special exception, doesn't it?
I'm reading that
And in the second one? I'm just trying to figure this out.
It says it does, it says it doesn't.
The difference in my mind was the 1 story. So if you had a story and a half that did not require a permit, you would go to the ZBA and not get a permit?
Something
Which seems odd to me.
Aye, accessory structures. All right, we can just skip this. Because even I'm getting confused.
Let's just remind let's remind the audience that the town planner noted that people were coming in and paying fees just to have, their sort of regular storage shed, and she was trying to save, people $200 per application. So there was a kind-hearted, spirit behind this.
It just was structure that's not significant, being required to meet the principal structure setback of 15 feet from your rear, 15 feet from your side, and we're talking about a little tool shed. If it doesn't bother anyone, they want to keep it the same way, keep it the same way. Just, right now they'll have to request a special exception and pay $300 to get the permit and wait the month and go through all that if they want to put their tool shed closer than 15 feet from the rear property line.
Mr. Ahern?
Were they bigger than 120 square feet?
Not the ones that I'm...
Then they never should have had to have gone in the first place.
Well, this was before we had the building permits. We just implemented building permits last town meeting.
I'm not following you on that.
It sounds like if it's less than 120 square feet, they don't have to get a building permit for it, as long as it's not a permanent structure.
Okay.
So they were trying to get permits, and they really didn't need to get them.
But if you're exempted from permits, are you then exempted from setbacks?
I know.
I mean, does that come with the no permit means no rules?
No, because...
If it's not on a permanent fixed spot, I would think that it's more personal property, and that's why they're saying no building permit. But then if you put a pad and a foundation...
But that's not, it just
underneath a 80 square foot building, then I think that's something different.
anything constructed or erected with a fixed location on the ground. It doesn't say anything about the foundation or...
I think there's a fair amount of confusion at the board about where this is going and what it all implies. And I think the spirit was that we didn't have a major problem, but we were trying to save some people some hassle and some money. But we might be moving too quickly on this at this time.
I agree. I was the one who posed the question at the last meeting. What's the driving force behind this?
Yeah.
And it seems like it's the convenience of the occasional person who wants to locate a shed closer to the setback requirement.
It wasn't so much convenience, but making them go through hoops needlessly. But, I mean, we can skip it. It was a suggestion.
Yeah, Mr. Ahern.
Isn't there a way to clarify it with the way that we have it, clarify what exactly would require and what would not require a building permit? Could that clarify anything?
I mean, that's in the building code. But, okay. I think what happened was I had my first proposal that was all worked out, and then there were suggestions made, and then I tried to incorporate the suggestions, and now even I'm confused, so...
I
think the hardest part, if I may,
Yes, you may.
is the fact that we have all these different size, shaped lots, and irrespective of the fact that we may all buy the same little storage shed accessory building, where you end up being able to put it on your property would not be the same. And I think that's the hard part when you have someone's on a quarter of an acre and they decide they want to put a shed. It's a lot different than myself out in the Aggie zone putting a shed on. So I think that's the issue. The shed itself is not the item, it's the property in which it's going to be put on and how close your neighbors are. And that's obviously the part that's confusing.
What's the, yes, Mr. Wilson?
I'd just suggest as a summary comment that I think that there is obviously some confusion. There may be some unintended consequences from this, and it doesn't seem like it solves a big problem. So I would suggest that we not move forward with this amendment.
I see a couple heads nodding and some people thinking, looking like they're thinking. Is that does Mr. Wilson capture the spirit of the board to wait on this one?
Do we vote on it?
That would be the clearest way for us to not to make a decision whether we move it. Yes, a vote would make it clear what we're doing as a board. So Mr. Wilson, I think, moves that we table this.
That's correct. I so move.
And Mr. Kelly seconds that. Is there any further discussion?
I'm sorry, who seconded? I missed
Mr.
that.
Kelly?
Okay.
So I'll call for a yay vote. Anyone who says yay will be moving to table this, so we'll not move it forward to our next meeting. All in favor, say yay.
Yay.
Opposed, say nay. And that unanimously is tabled. Next, we have the definition of family unrelated.
Okay, this is the one where the attorney and I spent the most time. Okay. Okay, what I wrote was that since we're a university town, we house a number of students in our community. In response to a situation where too many students live in one dwelling unit can create a negative impact on the neighborhood in terms of noise, trash, parking of cars, etc., the town of Plymouth has adopted a definition of family. Staff is proposing that this definition be more targeted to its purpose. In addition, since the purpose is to regulate how many students live in a dwelling, we need to state the regulation. Even though we provide a definition, a regulation is nowhere to be found in our zoning ordinance. Yet the purpose of the definition is to regulate how many students live in a dwelling. Our existing ordinance, we have a definition of family related, any number of persons related by blood or by marriage or adoption living together as a single housekeeping unit. Then we have a definition of family unrelated. And that's any group of 3 persons or less not related by blood, marriage, nor adoption living together as a single housekeeping unit. In determining the maximum number of persons, the children of any resident shall not be counted. So we have those 2 definitions. We're proposing on keeping those 2 definitions. The amendment is to add a 3rd definition, family university student. This is any group of 3 persons or less, some or all of whom are registered as post-secondary students who live together in a single dwelling unit. And what we're getting at here is just a group of 3, because we were having problems with people saying, well, he's my brother, he's my cousin, and then it was, does that mean you get 4 living there then instead because part is related? It was very, our intent is not to have more than 3 unrelated adults living together. So that's why I added that definition of family university student. Also, when you look at the use table, and it says residential uses, there's now an asterisk. Maybe it will be a footnote, but I didn't know what number it would be, so I just put an asterisk there. Asterisk or footnote it and say, this is the important part. All residential uses shall comply with one of the definitions of family as defined in the zoning ordinance. No more than 3 unrelated adults shall live together unless granted a special exception.
Is there a reason why for family unrelated use, we can say that the number of children aren't counted, but we don't say that for the other definition of family?
Correct.
Is there why wouldn't you do that?
Because at the time, Okay, family unrelated. Well, because we're talking about university students, so how many are going to be having children? And
Well-
if they do, then they can ask for a special exception. It's just, there's some people that are trying to get around this whole thing. So that's why I'm proposing having another definition that directly looks at what we're dealing with, instead of people saying, okay, that guy's my cousin, or that guy's my child.
It does seem more clear than the last time, than the last iteration. Mr. Wilson, will you ask? Is there any further conversation?
I just have one question.
Yeah, Mr. Kelly.
It says, any group of three persons or less. That means if two people are not married, living in the same place, they still could not live there, because it's three people or less. And I had always thought it was unrelated three people or more.
No, this is the definition of what a family is.
These are
But
the
any group of
permissible groups of people, John.
Any group of three persons or less.
Are allowed.
Right, okay. Just read this one.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to just look at the regulation part where it says no more than 3 unrelated adults shall live together. That's what
Then
we're
it's
getting at.
acceptable.
No more than 3. What?
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's what we've always been operating under.
So I just want to be clear. So if I'm a university student and I have a child, and I can't have 2 roommates because that'd make 4.
You're a university student and you have a
And
child.
if I have a child and I live with another university student who has
Well,
a
you
child.
have a child, then the child's related. I mean, it's not unrelated.
It doesn't say anything about.
Oh, about related, oh, okay. But, okay, so that's possible, so let's go through the special exception. The problem is I haven't had that circumstance. I haven't had the student saying I have a child. I've had the circumstance where they said, this is my cousin, and this is my brother, and this is so then we have 6, 7, 8 living together. I haven't had the circumstance where there was a student that had the child, but I am allowing for the special exception, so they can get a special exception at that time, and we can look at it case by case.
Well, I think with registration deadlines, it'd be hard to apply for the special exception in time to go to school, possibly. Like, well, you're excluding me and my child and my friend and her child from living in the community, because we'll have to talk to the landlord, and we'll have to have the landlord apply for a special exception, and we'll have to do all this in time before school starts. So I think it's a good idea that you talk about children not being counted in families that are unrelated, and now you're talking about unrelated. You're still talking about unrelated families. I don't understand why it's just not carried there. I mean, I would imagine the two adults who are not married but each have a kid are not going to be your typical bad.
Right. So that's
students.
permitted, right?
No, because we would be 4 unrelated university students. Yes, Mr. Sutcliffe.
Could we leave it as generic as no more than 3 unrelated adults shall live together, and forget figuring out who they are or what they do or where they're registered? Or
Yeah.
it seems like that's what's the snafu here seems to be, in that our definition is never quite accurate enough. I'm wondering if we need the definition.
I would think that's discrimination when you're saying a university student.
Okay, now, university student, I did research that. They're not a protected class. So in Boston, this is what they're doing now. They're doing registered as post-secondary. But if we leave it out, that's fine, except, as I said, we'll still have the circumstance where they'll say, we're cousins, so we can, and that's the situation we've gotten. We haven't had the one with students saying they have children.
Couldn't they say with the proposed amendment that they were cousins?
No, because we're saying any group of 3 persons or less. Doesn't matter if they're related or not.
But I'm saying family unrelated, any group of 3 persons or less. And then you're saying family university student, any group of 3 persons or less.
Oh, right. But they were saying, well, we're related.
So they're having more than 3.
Right. They're having more because they're related.
So
Related is any number of persons.
that still bothers me, that there's simply their university status would change them from a family unrelated
but
to
that's not that's not a protected
Yeah.
class. But I mean, if you feel uncomfortable, we can delete that. It's I'm just proposing it. Just proposing it because of the way that it's been abused. It hasn't been abused with that situation, not saying it never would be, but...
Maybe it's time to hear from the public.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever closed the last public hearing, but at 9:16, I'll open this one. Yes, Mr. Attorney Blaine.
Quentin Blaine, and I live in Plymouth. If I understand this definition right, there's 4 members to my family, and if one of us went to Plymouth State University full-time, one of my family members would have to move out or would have to get a special exception. I mean, is that really...
No.
Why not?
If 3 of them...
Because then you'd be family related, so you're family related.
Well,
you're all related.
But then if your cousins or brothers, you're family related, and that's what you're trying to avoid. Which one trumps?
I see, okay.
Yeah.
So that's unclear to me. And you may be able to word it, but I'm not sure which one would trump. But what you say from the student perspective about students, that's how it would affect a family. And there's a mother in my neighborhood who has 3 kids, and she's going to school. I don't know which one of them she's going to get to move out. And I don't know who's going to take them on because they're minors. But so I think it could be read that it would not work unless it had different language to it.
Yeah, I understand, okay. All right, I withdraw it.
Judge Kent.
I'd implore you to get rid of the notion of a special exception for this as well. Because a special exception is generally run with the land and go on forever. And yet these kids are going to go home in May, actually. And that's just going to create massive confusion. And I think it goes back to your comment about how do you apply for this and move in time. It's just going to be a nightmare.
Yes.
Well, first I'll speak in favor of the special exception because I think that it allows you to, it is a changing landscape, and the definition of related is a moving target these days, and it seems to be changing regularly. So having the flexibility for somebody to come in and have 2 couples that might not meet today's definition of what related is, but the board would like to hear why they feel they are and make some special exceptions, gives you some opportunities. Maybe you choose not to have that opportunity, though. I will say and agree, and I heard some of you say this as well, I think it's dangerous ground, slippery ice to start targeting single populations. As a matter of fact, in your discussion earlier tonight, there was a lot of efforts to label people as hamburger slingers or different things, and I think you wisely said, and the planner stated very eloquently, that we're not to look at those kinds of personal definitions because it opens up some dangerous ground, because I could probably sit here and rattle off numbers of other groups of people that we don't want to separate. They may not be protected categories. However, I think it's dangerous in general to ever start singling out subpopulations unless you have some really, really good cause. And I think your definition that you already have fits. And I don't know, Miriam, how many quote-unquote problem cases we've had with people claiming that we're exceeding the occupancy because we're related by cousinship or whatever, but I don't know that it's a huge problem. I also know that right now there are vacancies. Every landlord has some level of vacancies right now in town, and I don't suspect that's going to get better in the significant future, so I don't think we're going to have a lot of issues with this one for some time to come, because I think there's going to be a surplus of housing. There were a few, and it may not be germane to your conversations tonight, but there were some basic assumptions in the opening arguments that are not accurate. I just wanted you to be aware that we require all first and second year students to live on campus now, so the reality is, maybe with the exception of a rare medical exception or thing, basically they're all at least 20-year-old now that have had some level of experience. I'm certainly not going to say that they're all model citizens all the time, but I don't like sweeping generalizations that anytime you cluster a certain number of students together, you're going to have problems, because that's not always the case. I know it can be the case, so I respect that, but I think we have the protections that are necessary from my perspective. But thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Just another consideration with the special exception. There is a fee associated with that, correct?
Correct.
So, yeah. So if a renter is going to rent an apartment and they don't meet one of those classifications of family, then the landlord is going to have to pay a fee for that special exception. And they're not going to be able to pass that through the tenant, because the landlord is not allowed by law to ask for any more than 1 month's rent equivalent for a security deposit in addition to the first month rent. So they wouldn't be able to say, well, you owe me your first month rent plus your last month's rent for security deposit. Plus, now, because there are 4 of you who are unrelated, want to live together, I'm going to have to pay a fee for the special exception. You owe me that too. The landlord's not going to be able to do that, at least not legally. So the landlord's going to have an added expense just trying to rent their property. I don't know how that will work out. I don't know. I think that might be sort of a burden every time that landlord has to rent that apartment, especially where you're dealing with, I don't know, a university town where those apartments turn over every year. It seems like every year the landlord's going to have this added expense, and they're not going to be able to pass that on to the tenants.
Yes.
We just made an interesting note that if a landlord's going to rent to 4 people, if they ultimately are successful in that, they're going to collect a lot more rent, depending on what they set their rents at. So they might be quite willing to pay that fee if it meant they were going to generate additional rent and they were successful in getting a special exception. So it might be interesting to see how the market would play out in a capitalistic world.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? Then I'll close the public hearing at 9:24 and come back to the board. Mr. Kelly?
Mr. Chairman, how many more of these have we got to do?
1, 2, 3, 4.
It's 9:30 now, and I get up at 5:30. And I think things are going to get a little fuzzy from here on in, and it could be midnight before we get through, so I would suggest that maybe we should maybe wrap this up and do this at another time. But maybe I'm out of line to suggest that, but...
And you could even make a motion and see if it was seconded.
I make a motion that we postpone the rest of these amendments until another meeting, and also adjourn at 9:30.
Is there a second? I don't think there's the spirit yet, and I think that a lot of people in the audience who came here to speak to some of the issues we haven't addressed will appreciate us continuing to go on. So we're not quite finished with this family unrelated item. Mr. Randlett?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to propose that we just leave the ordinance as is, and...
I second it.
There's been a motion and a second. Yes?
Wait, but we do need to put a requirement in there, because now all we have is definitions.
Right. We're going to have to discuss the motion, so this is appropriate. Yes.
All right.
So yes, tell us some more, please.
So all I'm going to say is that's fine with not having family university student, but I would really recommend that we put in all residential units shall comply with one of the definitions of family as defined in the zoning ordinance, because otherwise we don't have a regulation.
But striking the following sentence, no more than 3 unrelated adults shall live together unless granted. Are you proposing the first sentence and not the second?
Sure, or we could do the first sentence and we could say no more than 3 unrelated adults shall live together to make it clearer, but don't put in unless granted a special exception. If you don't, just remove that last phrase.
Should we remove the proposal, or?
Well,
because having a definition is not the same thing as regulation.
Well, Mr. Randlett can amend his motion to reflect what he's hearing, which would be that we continue to keep the definitions of family. We do not add this third definition of family, but we do add the asterisk that says all residential uses shall comply with one of the following definitions of family as defined in the zoning ordinance, not having changed that definition.
Well, that would either be family related or family unrelated.
Correct.
Yeah, I would amend it to that point.
And I'm okay too. And you're happy with that? So.
Okay, and wait, what about do you want just that first sentence and?
That's what I think I believe he said.
Yes.
Okay, just the first sentence, okay.
Is there any further discussion on Mr. Randlett's motion? And again, if we pass this motion, all we're saying is that we'll bring it back to our next meeting, and we'll continue to have a public hearing on that in case some more ideas pop into the public's mind or ours. All in favor of Mr. Randlett's motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. So moving on to item number 4, methadone clinics.
Okay, both the attorney and planning board agreed on this one. So our existing ordinance, we don't have a definition for methadone clinic, and we don't even have it listed as a use. So I proposed a definition of methadone treatment clinic, which is methadone treatment or treatment facility means any properly licensed facility other than a hospital where the drug methadone is administered or dispensed to patients for the purpose of opiate addiction treatment, to add it in our use table, and to not allow it in the single-family district, don't allow it in the multifamily district, allow it as a special exception in the agricultural zone, the CI, the village commercial, the highway commercial, and the ICD. So in the commercial districts, it would be allowed as a special exception, but that we would not permit it in the single family and the multifamily.
Does the board have any questions about this proposal? It is 9:28, and I'll open up the public hearing on the methadone clinic item. Seeing no one, I'll close the meeting 1 minute later and come back to the board.
Make a motion to accept it,
And-
adding methadone clinics to our zoning ordinance.
I second.
Okay, it was moved by Mr. Ahern and seconded by Mr. Wilson. Any further discussion? All in favor of moving this to our next meeting for more public hearing and possibly on the warrant article, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so that passes, and we're next on to home occupation clarification.
Yeah, this one we didn't look at 2 weeks ago, but this was just a suggestion from the public. So, according to the Plymouth zoning ordinance, home occupations or home offices are permitted in all zones. However, although this is written in the zoning ordinance in section 412, it's not indicated in the section 304's use table. So the proposal is to footnote the office use to reference home occupations. Because what the argument was is that you look at the use table and you don't see it, so you think it's not permitted, and you wouldn't even know to look at section 412. So what my recommendation is that we asterisk or footnote office and put in home office / home occupation are permitted in all zones as long as they comply with section 412 of the zoning ordinance, and then we just reference it over.
And would that mean that they follow the same suit as office in all the zones?
Well, no, because
permitted
because it's permitted in all zones. It just references it to section 412.
I see why, okay. That
Okay, and
answered-
it defines
that
it,
answered
because,
what my
I mean,
next
otherwise,
question
someone
was.
looks here and they don't see home occupation, and unless, you know, you're the town planner, you don't know it's section 412.
All right, then I would just recommend you put a comma after the word zones, in all zones.
Are permitted in all zones, comma.
Only just because that sort of ends it's probably not perfect English grammatically, but it makes it very clear that they're permitted in all zones.
Okay.
Mr. Ranlett?
Yes, I mean, if we put that on asterisk and we say home office or home occupations are permitted in all zones, this one is saying that it's not permitted in single family.
Well, that's because there's a definition of office that's...
An office is a commercial office, like a dental office or a medical office, or...
What is section 412?
Well,
That's home occupation.
I'm not following why the asterisk is there then. If this office relates to a dentist office or something.
Maybe it'd be clear if that office said non-office, non-home office.
I mean, if I see office and then it's got home office or home occupation, I don't see where the two are.
I see what you're saying. So where it says office, would it make sense to say non-home office?
Okay.
Would that make it more clear for you if that said non-home office?
Well, I wouldn't be in that situation, but, you know, it's not for me, it's for other people that come in.
Okay, we have a...
Are we ready to have a public hearing on this? So at 9:31, we'll open up the public hearing. Mr. Miller had his hand up first.
I was the citizen at large on this. I thought it might be clearer if we just right underneath that use list, put home occupation, and it would be a separate line
Okay.
from office. That way you still don't want office in a single-family residential, but with a separate line, home occupation, you would then be permitted, and it would be asterisk by 412, which then puts the restriction of...
I agree.
Does that make sense?
Frank, you mean office and is not allowed in a single-family residential, but home office would be?
Yes. Home occupation, and then there's restriction, 20%. It can't be noise and the sensitivity of having your, say you have a computer-based business in your home.
Yeah, I know.
It's in one of your rooms, that's 20% less of your total floor space, and you only have, was it 1 or 2 employees? There's a whole list of issues of what you can do in your single-family residential zone under commercial activity, home occupation, versus an office.
So if you have office not allowed in a single, so I'm a surveyor.
Right.
And I have an office in my home.
That's a home
I can't be in a single family.
No, you have a home office.
It's a home occupation, and it deals...
Home occupation.
Yeah.
Clarify the difference between home office and home occupation.
Is whether or not your customer base is the amount of customer base that comes to your place of business.
That's home office?
Versus a regular commercial office. Now,
I understand. I'm trying to figure out which is the difference between an office and a home occupation, because it's a genetic type of wording when you said home occupation, because a home office is a home occupation.
Well, one is an office is a tool. You could say an office space is a piece of tool that's used to do an occupation.
But if I'm a woodworking guy,
that's fine.
I have tools in my woodworking
That
shop.
would be considered a home occupation. You want to classify it as an office, but that's the space that you actually do your occupation is a tool. And what this whole purpose and intent of this passage is the character of what you do in the single-family residential zone. We don't want commercial activities.
I can see a commercial office, but I can't just say a genetic office.
Well, the thing is...
Because I'm an appraiser, and I have an office in my home, in a single-family home. I have a home office. I'd have to move out of the single-family zoning because I got an office.
But I think it's a play on words as far as office space and so on. It's the character of what's actually happening, and whether or not you, as an accountant or a surveyor or a computer programmer in your home, you'd never see it from the outside. You'd never know that that activity is happening, versus what we have termed as an office, like such as in a village commercial zone, you have office space, and the character of the design of the office space externally is what impacts this type of zone we're in.
Okay, I think we're
I think are you saying is there a difference between home office and home occupation?
I don't think...
There's no difference between...
I think it just says home occupation, because a home occupation includes the office, and home occupation, as far as I can see, is you cannot disturb the element of a single-family residential landscape.
Right, so you don't like the term home office.
So whether it's occupation...
Let's come back to this as a board and continue with the public hearing so we hear everything from the public, please.
Okay.
Yes, Judge Kennett.
Very simple. Could you please just eliminate the words home office in the title, in that sentence?
Sure.
That'll eliminate a lot of the confusion that we've got here.
Yep.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, at 9:37, I'll close the public hearing and come back to the board. So there's been some input from the public that we might want to modify the language of this. Does anybody like to carry through the judge's proposal?
I make a motion that the classification of office be eliminated, and the that it would be changed to home occupation, and it should be in single-family residence, and take the office.
So on the asterisk part, you would like us to cross off the first two words and just leave it as home occupation?
Yeah.
And add it just as a separate line, right?
Right.
Okay,
Now,
so we'll just
to-
add a separate line, home occupation, and then show it as permitted in all the zones.
To clarify a little bit more, if you want to put office, you could say commercial office. But that's...
It seemed like we got to a point of clarification there, that if we just took off those two words, we'd know what we were talking about.
Yeah, and we'll just add it as a separate line, home occupation.
Yep.
All right.
It's instead of asterisking it, okay.
Unless there's any objections, I'm going to take that as a consensus to move forward with that. Okay. Item number 6. Quote, incidental to construction, close quote, clarification. Miriam, a minute ago you said that, we hadn't really discussed that one. Is this another one that we didn't discuss earlier?
Right, this one has been added.
And what about the last, is there one more after this?
Yeah, just that one we discussed before.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'd like to suggest a point of order here. With regard for notice to be published for public hearing, there was no elaboration of any of these zoning amendments in the newspaper posting or a posting on the bulletin board downstairs. Now, for all of the ones that we've discussed so far, with the exception of the last one, there was plenty of discussion at the work session, at the last planning board work session, which has been televised now probably half a dozen to a dozen times in the last couple of weeks. This one sprang full flower and just appeared in the package that arrived last weekend for the planning board. And I'd submit to you that the public really had no way to know about this. There was no summary of it that was posted anywhere. So there could be a lot of interested parties that would want to appear here at the public hearing. I think that we have not complied with the notice requirements for a public hearing on this matter.
Okay. I note that. Is there any other discussion along this line? I'd like to get some clarification from the town planner. In terms of whether this item ended up on a warrant article, there needs to be public notification and hearing. So if we move this to our next meeting, would the public have had enough opportunity to read this and come give us our input?
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, I'll give the history on this. Remember, I sent these proposed zoning ordinance amendments to the town council. Town council said, you know what, since you're looking at doing that, why don't you add this? So that was a suggestion from him. We could consider this as not ready for public hearing. I just bring it before planning board, and planning board can say, yes, we want to have a public hearing on this, or just plain drop it. This was recommended to me by the town council. So that's why it appeared. I didn't mean to trick anyone or anything underhanded. It's just, that was his recommendation.
Okay, Mr. Renlet?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I recommend that we table this, put it on the next public hearing, and discuss it at that time.
Okay, so we don't even want to discuss it?
Let's discuss whether we want to discuss it, because, I mean, in fairness to the process we've been using, I mean, all of the items,
Okay,
all the items that are before the public today have been negotiated
Discussed, all right.
off the table, and it might actually expedite the next meeting if we at least get a sense of this, and by discussing it publicly, have the public aware of exactly what we're talking about. So that they can choose to come to our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, in other words, we're going to discuss it tonight and also discuss it at the next meeting.
Just like we've done with all the other ones that we've moved forward.
The other ones we've discussed it and said, you know what, we don't even want it to go to public hearing, just skip it, we don't want it.
Yeah.
So this one we could even say, well, we want to go forward with it, or we don't even want to go forward with it.
I think in fairness to the process, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Mr. Wilson, that this didn't come before, at least me, in my sense, as openly as it could have. But I do know that there have been some people from the public who went to the town planner's office to get a sense of what's on their agenda, and I think they're here to speak tonight. they've been waiting through a long meeting to do so. If there's no objections, I'd like us to discuss this. Maybe we can fast track it so we don't wordsmith it to death or get into too heated a debate, but just get a sense of the contours of what we'll discuss at our next meeting. Does that sound fair? All right, so I'll turn this back to the town planner. You've already given us a little bit of an introduction that the town attorney brought this to your attention while he was going through other items.
Right, when he went through the other ones, he said, you know what, since you're looking at the ordinance, I recommend that we clarify it, since it's been a little bit unclear about incidental. So he's proposing to add a sentence to section, okay, it's 710.4C. And the existing 710.4C, it starts out as 710.4. The following are prohibited within the environmentally sensitive zone as outlined above, okay? And then C is, this is prohibited. Any placement or removal of fill excepting that which is incidental to the lawful construction or alteration of a building or structure, or the lawful construction or alteration of a parking lot or way, including a driveway or a portion of the premises where removal occurs. Okay, that's existing. He is asking the planning board to look at adding, if placement or removal of fill is either in compliance or proposed to achieve compliance with federal or state law, regulation, or requirements, then it shall be considered incidental as that term is used above.
Any discussion from the board before we ask the public? Or any more discussion?
Yeah, I think I'd like to make 2 points about this. First of all, I think that this has obviously been a hot issue in town for the past several years, and it would be helpful if the town were able to craft an ordinance that would essentially make this definition of incidental more crisp and more easily understood. What this does, on the other hand, though, is it pulls it out of the hands of the town entirely and just says if it's compliance with federal or state law, then it's acceptable. And frankly, that rankles me. I think that our job is to construct town zoning ordinances, and this removes it from the hands of the town. Also, it creates the impression that the removal of fill, accepting that which is incidental, is conditioned. But essentially, the condition is a non-condition, because to say if it complies with federal or state law, that it's all, then it should be considered incidental. Well, if it's not in compliance with federal or state law, then it's not going to happen anyway. So it's sort of like saying if the sun shines on it, that it's then it's incidental. I think it's a. I think that it's an attempt to put some wording in the zoning ordinance that perhaps really does call for some good wording, and I don't think this makes it.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Ahern.
I
and then Mr. Cully.
I have to agree with Mr. Wilson that I don't know if this is quite the way that we want to attack this problem, and I was someone that said that we do need to try to figure out what the definition is, and it kind of is really dependent on the makeup of this board, whether it moves forward or is tabled, and that could fluctuate. I just don't know the best way to take a stab at it. I'm not sure whether, I just don't know. I don't think this is the right way. I think it's probably too quick.
Okay, Mr. Kelly?
The only thing that I have to say is that since this is such a hotly contested item, it might be well to take it out of the town's ability to control something by special interest groups. And by state and federal, I think that it's been pretty well covered as to what they want to say. So consequently, since we can't agree on it, and it's been 5 years that we haven't agreed on it, that maybe it was time to have somebody else take the reins as far as controlling what is incidental and non-incidental. That's the only thing I'm thinking of.
Okay. Any other comments from the board before I open up the public hearing? Yes, Mr. Ahern?
One more thing. Are we maybe too quick on this, and maybe the court case that's before the town now, would that not settle it? Because that would be, no one else is ever going to go that far to try and figure out what incidental is, and isn't that the crutch of what the court case is about? And maybe that will define it for us.
That's a good point.
I think from a legal perspective, we don't want to say what we think the crutch of the court case is, but I think certainly that's an issue that's out there.
So maybe it just needs to wait, but we'll hear what the public.
Well, let's see what the public has to say on this issue. At 9:48, I'll open up the public hearing to anybody who'd like to speak to this issue. Attorney Blaine.
Quentin Blaine, and I live in Plymouth. I have some concerns with this proposal. Some of it is the process that it wasn't disclosed earlier, and I know there are people in the town who have looked at the video before and made a decision that there weren't going to be amendments that they need that concerned them, that they wanted to speak out on, and they might want to speak out on this one in particular. This word, incidental, has been litigated for the past, I guess, 5 years, and on January 20, it actually is going to be one of the issues at the Supreme Court, because that's really what I think is going on. In 2007, there was an effort, there was a petition warrant article. Yeah, but I think it was actually voted on in 2007. There's a couple of them. But that was voted on in regard to changing the definition of this section, and that was defeated. I also have a concern. I don't know if the Conservation Commission was asked whether this fits in with what they want to do. Now, that's just kind of the process piece, but as far as substantive, I don't think this is clarification at all. I think it actually is very much a substantive change to the ordinance. And I think it is brought up that, Mr. Kelly, you may have alluded to it, and some others, is that it really changes the definition, but it changes of incidental, but it changes it in a way that we don't know what the definition is. Somebody in Concord or somebody in Washington, D.C., a bureaucrat who probably isn't going to be paying attention to our ordinance when they write a regulation about floodplain. Or some bureaucrat could be lobbied, or agency could be lobbied to make a change that would come back, and we would have a different ordinance for that particular section. Now, the other piece about it being a clarification is I have the brief that was filed by the town attorney on behalf of the town, and when I look at it, it is, in a brief, one of the things you do is you compile, in the early part of it, the text of the statutes and the ordinances and the rules that you'll be arguing in here. And actually, there's 19 pages of that text. 13 of them are about the federal ordinances in regard to floodplains. So 6 pages deal with New Hampshire law and 13 deal with federal. And if you take a look at the table of contents of the brief on section 1A, which is the beginning argument. In the argument, it's the earth-moving activities proposed by Topsfield are necessary to comply with local and federal floodplain regulations. The next subsection is section 710 must be interpreted with federal floodplain regulations. The next section is federally mandated one-to-one compensation maintains the property's flood absorption capacity. The next section is subsection 3. The ZBA properly found that the project's proposed earth-moving activities are necessary for one-to-one floodplain, that's the federal floodplain compensation. You move on to the next larger section, section B. And if you go to on that one, section 1, the project's proposed earth-moving activities must comply with the ordinance and federal floodplain regulations for there to be lawful construction. So the first whole half of the argument says that it's put in a different way. It's basically said, well, you don't have to worry about this ordinance because we're going to take care of the floodplain area because we have to do that anyway with federal regulations. This change here doesn't just clarify, it turns it on its head. It basically would say that these would say, we complied with federal regulations, therefore the zoning ordinance is irrelevant. It's a little bit like the wireless carriers, the antennas with the cell towers. There's some federal regulations that took pieces of that away from towns in the federal carrier law, and there was a lot that was we were dealing with zoning in the early days of the cell towers, because what we could do and couldn't do. I think as far as this definition, maybe we do need it clarified. I don't know how we're going to figure it out, but it's going to be figured out a bit for us. What's up in front of the Supreme Court is really, was it interpreted right? Was it interpreted wrong? And it's not a reflection on the planning board. You may have interpreted it right, whoever was sitting on that particular day, or may have interpreted it wrong, but it's taken courts years and years and years to try to follow up, to try to figure that out too. But I think this is more of an end run around what happened before, and I think it's a major change to this section of the ordinance, and I don't think the right people have been involved, such as the Conservation Commission, and I think it takes it out of the hands of Plymouth residents. And Plymouth residents have spoken not only when they passed this ordinance, but the last time there was an amendment to try to change this definition, not to change it. And I think now is not the right time to bring it up. Once we get an order from the Supreme Court, we'll know what the parameters are and where we can go with it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Judge Kent and then Mr. Flanders' hands.
Actually, this is what I came to speak about. My wife came down to the town hall and got a copy of this, and so I did get a chance to read it. But I would point out, as Attorney Blaine has pointed out, the notice requirements for this meeting certainly were not met if you read the statute about what you have to do to notice a meeting. Putting it on video is not adequate. You have to tell people what it is you're going to talk about when you talk about zoning changes. Not the whole thing, but a summary of what it is it's going to change so people can say, I want to participate. What would I say about this? Well, the first thing I'd say is I've worked with lawyers for a long time, and the answer that you get back has a lot to do with the question that you ask. And I don't know if the wrong question was asked, but this is the wrong answer. A lot of people worked awful hard in this town to create the environmentally sensitive zone. A lot of thought went into it, a lot of debate went into it, a lot of energy went into it, and it was created. It wasn't created to allow the federal government and the state government to determine when and where to move dirt. It was a different kind of a regulation. It was a regulation that was built for Plymouth by Plymouth people. We don't want to give that away. We shouldn't want to give that away. Secondly, this room was way too small for those hearings. A lot of people in this town are very interested in this topic. Right at the outset, Miriam said something I think was really good. Maybe you just don't want to deal with this right now. And I think with the fact that there's litigation going on about this, this is not the time to mess with this. This is not the time, on the spur of the moment, at the last minute, to try to pass something that took an awful lot of thought to put in there in the first place. There's plenty of time in the future to rectify the problem and get everybody's input and put a lot of thought into it and do it right. And I don't think this is the right way to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Flanders, you had your hand up earlier?
I think Quentin and Dave pretty much covered things in a lot more detail than I would ever be able to, and a lot more eloquently. I would point out, and I agree, of course, with both of their comments. This is one, premature. pending the outcome of the Lowe's case, without question. And it does suggest to me that the focus of the planning board is in the wrong direction on this issue. It seems like the history of the planning board, and I can't blame the sitting members, but the history of the planning board has to work toward allowing for development in the regulatory floodway, which is just counter to common sense. You don't develop in the floodway. You should be thinking about further protection of your aquifers and not allowing commercial development in those particular areas. So if you were proposing tonight, as you are in this one, out of the blue, to eliminate the potential for development in the regulatory floodway, I'd be here to support you, even if that wasn't properly announced and given proper notice. But the process, as has been pointed out, it's been a long process to get to where we are today. We still need a definitive opinion, and hopefully we'll get that from the Supreme Court. But until then, this is you're trying to make changes or correcting something that may be already dealt with by others and be moot by the time we get through the process. And not even to have the language to look at tonight, walking in here, is just amazing that this is even being discussed. I didn't happen to have the time to get to the planning board to get a copy of what was proposed. I didn't even know what the language was until the town planner mentioned it tonight. And this is just not fair to the public and all the people that worked as I did way back when I was in the Conservation Commission when the environmentally sensitive zone was created. This is not what the town of Plymouth wants, or clearly the vote in 2007. They don't want to see changes to the ordinance that would, in theory, improve it, which in fact it doesn't do. So I'm obviously opposed to what's being proposed tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I would like to point out the fact that I think most of the people have viewed the term incidental as a unit of measure of volume. And certainly Lowe's, in working with RSA 155A and talking about soil, substantially large numbers, and so people don't just connect that with incidental. They think it's 200,000 square yards is not incidental. It's a large piece of dirt. However, the same process you can talk about RSA 79:1, which is trees. And in the process of your exemption or permit to build, the Department of Environmental Services, Department of Revenue Administration, and this board's process acknowledges when you give a permit to build, whether it's a single-family doghouse or a Lowe's, part of the point of construction, you recognize and acknowledge that the incidental element of cutting some trees, removing the stumps, playing in the dirt for a basement, is incidental to the whole permit process. So incidental is not a unit of measure of volume. It's a process. It's a connective value to the process of the action that's being taken. That's why RSA 79:1 has the exemption, just like RSA 155A, under the conditions and exemptions of the law, is that once a governing body issues a permit, you are allowed to cut trees without permit. It's incidental to the point that you want to build your house there on a piece of property in a forest. You're going to be cutting trees, possibly going to put in a foundation, so you're going to have to play in the dirt. That's incidental to the permit. The permit is to build a building. It's not a unit of measure, whether you're using 1 cubic yard, 1 tree, or a whole forest.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at 10:01 and return back to the board.
Make a motion that we table this.
Second.
Date uncertain.
I think that was seconded by Mr. Randlett. And you table it until when? Not to...
He said date uncertain.
Date uncertain, I think. Is there any discussion on Mr. Ahern's motion, seconded by Mr. Randlett, to table this to a date uncertain?
I just wonder, what would happen if a farmer decided to be in a down, in a sensitive area and wanted to plow up a field and level the ground and everything like that, as far as either incidental or permitted use and everything like that, because he's disturbing the land just as well as somebody is going to build a Lowe's. And I'm just curious of what a lot of these people thought about a farmer leveling the land to plant some corn or something like that. So you're doing exactly the same thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other conversation about the motion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All in favor of tabling this to a date uncertain, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions, so that passes unanimously. Our last item is the zoning map amendment.
Okay, this one we discussed before. This is, I gave you all a map before. This is at the corner of Tenny Mountain Highway and Highland Street. And I sent out notices to everyone involved in this. There's properties that's at the corner of Tenny Mountain Highway and Highland Street that's split zoned, and they followed the flood zone map. The zoning line followed the flood map. And instead, we're proposing it to follow the road like all of the rest of the zone does. The zone line follows Tenny Mountain Highway. You got a copy of the map, right? So you know what I'm talking about? Okay. No changes. This is just moving forward on this. Yeah, 3 or 4 properties.
And is there a map for the public to look at?
Gosh, it was in the mail out.
Basically, what was done was the contour line sort of zigged and zagged and wove all around, and now you're just trying to make it streamlined between 2 points where it does intersect with Tenny Mountain Highway, and just say from those 2 points, it is Tenny Mountain Highway.
Mr. Chairman?
Correct.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Kelly.
I really think this confusion was zoning that was back years and years ago, because Highland Street, or it used to be Route 25 coming up through Plymouth, followed that, the zoning line. And when they put the bypass in, they changed the configuration of the road, so that it was just because somebody didn't change the zoning back at that point, and I think really that I think it should be changed.
Yeah, so we're making up for lost time.
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's just because like the old surveyor went to the birch tree, you don't do that anymore. The same idea as what happened with that zoning when they changed the road, they didn't change the zoning.
Okay. I think my own recollection is that it seemed such a straightforward idea at our last meeting that the board was pretty unanimously behind it. So I'll just move right now to a public hearing at 10:05. Judge Kennett.
I've been asked, we've asked to see a map every time at these meetings.
Oh, I've got it. Does anyone have it from the mail out? I mean, I can just run downstairs and get the map.
I checked.
From which mail out? Was the most recent, or?
No, last week,
then I don't.
on December 3rd meeting. I don't have it. You weren't here, so you wouldn't have it.
Well, I might have it with a mail. I might have it with a mail out. She mailed these out.
You want me just to run downstairs? All right, I'll just run downstairs. Give me one second.
Last meeting, couldn't get noticed?
Yes.
While she's gone,
Yes, please.
it doesn't depend on the map. I guess my question is, I'm sure that in the town of Plymouth, we have innumerable situations similar to this. What is the board's, why has this one been targeted? What is the purpose? Why are we trying to solve this particular problem at this time when we have probably a plethora of these situations?
Well, that question actually came up at an earlier meeting, and may I take a stab at it? Actually, as you know, any citizen can petition for a change, and while that formal process wasn't initiated formally, to speak redundantly, what became apparent was that some properties were in two zones, even though it looked like it should logically be commercial and on Tenny Mountain, because it was on Tenny Mountain Highway, and there was difficulties with getting banks to understand that it really is commercial, and apparently there was a fear that banks weren't going to support commercial development in these various lots, because banks were scared off by having to deal with two different zones with their two different requirements. So this would just bring it up in line with Tenny Mountain Highway and make the whole area uniform.
It's these three lines.
So it's sort of an informal response to a petition.
Where does the line go? Where the middle line go?
It followed here. See the lines here on Tenny Mountain Highway?
Okay.
Just have it follow Tenny Mountain Highway instead of dipping down.
The area has moves into that.
If I could add,
It dips
John?
And the explanation is that it follows the flood zone, but we do have a flood zone overlay.
So now this is going to be one continuous line on the north
Correct.
side of the Tenny Mountain Highway.
Correct. North side Tenny Mountain Highway. I did send out letters to the property owners. I did get, Mr. Harris from Harris Furniture came in my office, and he asked for clarification. I went through it with him, and he's fine with it. He agrees.
And it's going to be the north side or the south side?
It will go, the zoning line will go to the north
Okay.
side, so that everything north of Tenny Mountain Highway, I mean, not in this area, everything north is zoned agricultural, and things south are typically zoned ICD, industrial and commercial.
Mr. Ahern, a question.
Mrs. Kent had her question kind of revolved around that there's a whole bunch of these situations all throughout the town, and why just these small area. And we did talk about that, and we said, well, maybe we should just take a stab at the area that seemed the most pressing, or the most
because
logical to fix.
The original suggestion was that I look through it and see where the strange anomalies came up, you know, that it looks like that it should typically hug a road. Maybe there was a new road put in, but that was shot down, and it said, let's just do it one at a time, so.
Any other comments from the public in our public hearing? Then I'll close it at 10:09 and return back to the board. Mr. Ahern?
So it looks like there's lot 18, 19, 20, and 21.
Well,
Those are the numbered lots.
Here, see 21 points here.
Okay. So 19 is...
18, 19 goes around like that, and 20.
We're not talking about 36, 35, 34, 40,
Nope.
but those are in the same situation.
Yeah, we have it throughout, and that was, you know, the original proposal was to look at the ones throughout, but we're just going to concentrate one at a time.
You mentioned...
And the reason why was because there was, this was causing a lot of difficulty, and it looks like needlessly.
Yes.
What about, did you get a response from the other property owners
No, but we
besides?
sent them certified letters.
About zoning illegal.
Oh, is that what you're asking? Sorry.
So it seems like what we're doing is we're kind of initiating what they could do on their own by doing a petition. Whereas rather than just waiting for them to do it, we're kind of trying to initiate it first. Whereas the only problem we have is, the concern we have right now is 18, and they could petition very easily.
Yeah, whenever you view something that it looks like there's a map error, then it really, I mean, the planning board should be looking at that for map errors, and, you know, we shouldn't be putting the burden on the property owner.
I think you're making a very good point, Mr. Ahern, but also the town, you might remember, the town planner had said that there were, you know, many of these, and I said, what are you talking about, 10 or 50? And she said, oh, 50. And one of the questions was, well, how quickly could she get through it all? And so this just sort of made sense as a priority for her to look at, given the other time, because she also wanted to go through and make all these other proposals, and so she only had so much time before the town meeting. So you're right that in a sense we're acting, you know, we're sort of pushing the issue where we don't necessarily have to, but this came out of the spirit that the planning board's job is to make sure that the zoning map does make sense overall. So this is in a sense a first step of many. Yes.
Is there anyone here that might know if Route 3 looks like it probably did change and followed this line here? Is that right, Mr. Kelly?
25.
Route 25. Is that why there's this splitting properties here too? Do you think?
Old Route 25 was the one.
See, yeah, right, old Route 25 zigzagged up through there, and then all of a sudden, with the bypass and with the new 25, they straightened it out, and that's why you got that zoning winding down through there.
And that's why they had to make that definition of how do you interpret the zoning then?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And going back to your first, about the property owner, one of the ones that came to my attention was a property owner trying to sell his property. The person that was interested in it got cold feet when they saw it was split zoned. And I said, well, it's possible we can look at that, because I don't know the history of why the zone went there. If it's a mistake or an error or its conditions changed, we can look at that. But this individual doesn't own the property, but it's preventing her from being interested in it.
Yes, Mr. Aaron.
How long of a process is it to petition to get rid of the split zone?
And does it cost, does the applicant have to pay a fee or anything?
I would imagine so. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
It's a petition to town meeting.
At town meeting?
Yeah, don't you have to get signatures, or?
Yeah, you get 25 signatures.
25 signatures.
But if someone wants to buy your property in February, it may take you all the way till 12, 13 months later before you can finally get some resolution to it, before you could try and sell it, and the seller might be gone by then.
Right.
Might probably be 10 signatures, I'm not sure.
You make a convincing argument, Mr. Aaron. A compelling one. Are there any other comments from the board? The question is, do we want to move this forward for our next meeting and potentially keep it, have it on as a warrant article at the town meeting? Mr. Aaron?
I'd be a little concerned because we contacted 3 property owners and only one really got back. It sounded like, for one reason or another, they didn't get back to us. Why are we pushing the issue then?
No, but I mean, I think that means that they're fine with it. I mean,
Well, the biggest thing is the other two don't really care about selling their property, so why worry about it until they get around to selling their property?
well, no, actually, one of them is selling their property.
The other two? There's 3 pieces of property, right?
Right. Well, Mr.
pieces.
Harris is not selling his property.
I'm saying two pieces of property, they're not selling it. There's only one person that wants to sell his property.
Right, and I didn't hear back from him.
The
one that wants to
sell the property?
Right. I mean, because normally he sits right there.
What's that? What'd you just say?
I said normally he sits right there.
Yeah, right, okay. Well, that changes the whole situation. Finally.
I mean, I could call him on the phone, I just,
No, if he's
figure-
not interested enough, then...
This is the last item of our new
no,
business.
I took it as that he was in favor of it.
So what is the desire of the board to do with this?
Are we able to completely disregard the request, or...
Well, the request is really coming from the town planner, so we have to give the town planner the sense that we appreciate that she's looking for maps to fix, and that we should fix this map based on what her professional opinion is and the logic that's been used, or that we're not going to move this any further.
I make a motion we don't move this any further.
I second it. You said don't.
I didn't hear the motion.
Mr. Kelly's motion was that we do not move this matter any further.
And I second it.
Mr. Ahern seconded that. Is there any further conversation on this motion? Then I'll call for a vote, and a yay vote will not move this any further, so it'll die right here if it passes. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it.
Okay.
Okay. Next on our agenda is unfinished and other business. Is there any unfinished or other business from the board? And then we have finally public comments, and I'd just like to remind everybody that public comments is not a place to bring up new and other business, but to speak to an item not on tonight's agenda. Yes, Ms.
That would be me.
Ms. Kemp.
I won't take much because it's late, and I know that, but I just want, the last time I spoke to the board, I was bringing up the question of the fact that our total ordinance needs to be revamped. And I think the discussion that's gone on tonight with the amendments that have been proposed for changing the ordinance this time is a good example of why we need to totally overhaul our zoning ordinance. I don't mean change it totally, but go through it and look for all those inconsistencies, look for those redundancies, look for the things that don't match up. It's like a patchwork quilt now. We've been at it for so many years, picking here, picking there, making changes here, making changes there. It's time, and this was what was going to happen after the master plan was finished. The idea was the master plan would be completed, and then we would do a total overhaul of the zoning ordinance. In 2004, we appropriated the money to do that. It's time. It's time to revamp our zoning ordinance. It's a mishmash. And all the discussion tonight points to that. I mean, we have map inconsistencies. We have language that contradicts each other. We have definitions without any ordinance that goes with it. I mean, it's time to take on this job and do it the right way. That's my lesson for me. The only other thing I want to say, and this will just take a second, is I was listening while I was baking Christmas cookies to the beginning of the beginning of your meeting, and there was a discussion about the housing study that was done. I was a member of that housing study. I was the planning board representative to it, and I'd just like to read to you page 49 of the study. I think it a little bit contradicts what your planner read to you. It says, in contrast, Plymouth has 16% of the market area's households and 32% of its jobs. By both of these comparisons, it can be said that Plymouth is accommodating its fair share of the region's inventory of subsidized housing units.
Right, and
Page 49.
let me just clarify that that came from this, meaning Plymouth's housing needs. I didn't misquote it. I didn't even read this. This is one study. What was asked was North Country Council, which is a separate study, which did census data, and this is up to date. This is older.
Right.
Okay. I mean, we could look at this study too, but I was reading census data.
But I think when you start talking about the cost of units, Plymouth's housing, rental housing units, the cost is high because we have a lot of competition for rental units in Plymouth because of the college population. And so therefore, people do have to pay more for rental properties in Plymouth than they do in other communities because of that competition.
No, I'm just saying, he mentioned the North Country Council, and I quoted that one.
May I
This one doesn't have
make one
statistics.
one statement? The rental situation in Plymouth has drastically changed since the new dormitories came out. We used to have 110% rentals, and now it's well down below 100. So consequently, whatever was in reports or whatever, North Country Council or anything, everything like that is completely out the window, and you're going to have a very updated report as far as what the percentages are and
What I was reading, though, was about subsidized housing, not...
Yeah, right. But I'm just saying that the subsidized housing it ties in with the rental. And I was just reading
Mr. Kelly?
Yeah.
We're still in public comment.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just
My comments are finished.
Yeah, I was just reading the New Hampshire Planning Board, and somebody should read the definition of low-income housing and working housing before they talk too much more.
Okay, thank you.
So there are two definitions.
Is there any other public comment?
No.
All right. At 10:21, I'm closing the public comments, and we have the item of adjournment.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
All right, Mr. Randlett And Mr. Wilson seconds it, and everybody else is standing up. But let the record note that Mr. Sutcliffe did join us when we reconvened, I think at 8:25, and he's been voting ever since.
8:20.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.